Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto becomes master of blood manipulation part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Kohanagakur no Sado. One of the more beautiful hidden villages in the entire world during the day, but when the moon is high in the sky, that is where the true beauty of Konoha managed to shine. But it was on this night, where the veteran shinobi were walking out of the local pub, laughing in their drunken stupor, that an ecstatic orange flash passed by, a happy laugh following in its wake, leaving the drunken shinobi staggering with confusion. The orange flash that had passed them was known as Uzumaki Naruto, and he had done something that no one else could ever accomplish. He had stolen the forbidden scroll and knocked out the Hokage by using his Warak no Jutsu. With his grin growing by each second, Naruto continued his way deeper into the forest, happily avoiding all of the branches that could have hurt him had he been just a little bit taller, until he finally came across the old shed Mizuki had told him to meet him at. He tried to slide to a halt, but he managed to trip on a small pebble, and with a yell, he crashed face first onto the ground. He stayed on the ground for 2 whole minutes before his embarrassment subsided before getting up onto his feet, walking over to the scroll and sitting himself down on the ground in front of it. Operation Scroll grab has been completed, but now to open the scroll, Naruto told himself with a happy tone as he picked up the scroll and tried to open it, but found out a few moments later that opening it was a lot harder than it sounded. Okay, maybe I didn't think this thing through. Naruto stared at the scroll for a few minutes with a pout before he stood up and began to stomp on it, seeing if it would bust open, but when that failed, Naruto went for throwing it against a nearby tree, but to his shock, the scroll had embedded itself into the tree. After a few minutes of pulling at it, the scroll finally was released from the tree's death grip and decided as a last resort to take a fallen tree branch and tried to pry the scroll open, found himself not being able to open it, so Naruto kept trying, putting all of his strength into it before his hand slid down the branch painfully, causing him to yelp as his palms were cut forcefully, causing them to bleed. Ah! Naruto screamed out in anger, tossing the branch to the side as stalked away from the scroll, his hands in a clawing position as blood dripped off of them. But that was when Naruto turned around and ran to the scroll and picked it up in his hands and tossed it away near the shed with an enraged yet desperate yell, but when Naruto's bloodied hand touched the spiral, it began to glow a dull blue. Naruto fell to his knees and banged his hands upon the ground as tears slowly formed on his face as he sobbed out, why can't I ever catch a break? All I wanted was to become a shinobi, to become Hokage, and hopefully earn the right to be her friend again. He slammed his fist into the ground once more, then lowered his head forward. Maybe she was right, maybe I am a failure. What Naruto didn't notice as he was lamenting to himself was that the scroll had started to shine brightly until it slowly filled that area, and when Naruto caught the radiant blue out of the corner of his eye. Naruto turned himself around so he was sitting on his butt and let out an odd whoa before covering his eyes when it became bright enough that it began to blind him. Haruka Yumino was angry. No, scratch that. Haruka Yumino was absolutely livid as he searched the entire city for his blonde-haired student. He was on his way home from the academy from working overtime, as he always did, until he along with his friend Mizuki was being summoned to the Hokage's tower, where he heard Naruto had stolen the forbidden scroll. He didn't know what in the hell possessed his admittedly favorite student to commit such a treasonous crime, but he also was confused at how Naruto managed to knock out the Hokage, who kept the scroll in his safe under his desk, and another thing that concerned him was how Naruto knew the code to the safe in the first place. Don't worry Iruka-kun, Mizuki said with a sugary sweet smile that dripped with cheerfulness, but had Iruka known why he had this smile and talked with so much cheerfulness, he would have become suspicious, but he merely smiled at his longtime companion and gave him his thanks before the two separated, but he didn't get far because a certain snake mistress that was shadowing him suddenly appeared and hugged the Chiknin from behind. Iruka-kun, be careful, the snake mistress told him, her strong voice never betraying her nervousness. Haruka merely smiled at this and turned around with the intent to kiss her, which she gladly took the opportunity to do so, but when the two pulled away, Haruka noticed that Anko was looking at something. When he asked what was wrong, she merely grinned and pointed behind him, saying, I think that's caused by your boy. Haruka was confused by her statement, but when he turned around, he saw a bright light coming from the middle of the forest, which amazed him because it was so far away. With one last parting kiss, Haruka dashed his way to the forest at a high speed, inwardly thinking, please Kami, don't let anyone else find him. Naruto. When the light finally died down, Naruto opened his eyes and noticed the scroll was wide open. Naruto smiled as he scrolled his eyes up and down the list of jutsu until his eyes spotted the perfect jutsu, which was followed by similar jutsus under it. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. That seems pretty interesting. Let's see if I can learn this. After half an hour of working on this jutsu, Naruto let a small smile appear on his face before exhaling softly. He had managed to learn the Kage Bushin Jutsu. I proved everyone wrong, I proved her wrong. I do have what it takes to be a shinobi, and soon I'll prove them wrong again when I become Hokage. Believe it. Naruto thought to himself as his eyes found another jutsu he could learn. Bunshin Bakuha and Bushin Bakuha. Ikauden, exploding clone technique. Flash bomb, that honestly sounds pretty damn cool, Naruto said to himself before his ears perked up. Someone was coming quickly, so as fast as he could, Naruto took out a small piece of paper and wrote down the hand seals for the Bushin Bakuha and its subjutsu Bushin Bakuha. Ikauden and quickly closed the scroll to practice them later, only to hear someone behind him, breathing slowly and angrily. Naruto seemed to pale as he slowly turned around to face the angry Chunin known as Yumino Iruka, only to feel said Chunin's fist impacting the top of his head. Ouch. Damn it, Iruka-sensei. That hurt. Naruto told him as Iruka rubbed his knuckle with a frown on his face. Naruto, you're lucky that's all you're getting for stealing the forbidden scroll. Iruka yelled back before saying softly, you're lucky I got here before anyone else. Otherwise, you would have gotten so much worse. Naruto looked down at the ground, pondering his sensei's words. He always knew the villagers shunned him, but he never understood why exactly the reason they did this to him, but all he knew was that they did, and next to the Sandaime, Iruka was one of the few that helped and protected him. Even now, Iruka had searched for God knows how long to find him because Iruka cared for him, and no matter how much Iruka got on his nerves at times for busting up his pranks and making him clean up his messes, Naruto was glad someone cared for him, but then Naruto remembered the reason he had stolen the scroll in the first place. I have a reason for taking, not stealing, but taking the scroll, you know. Naruto exclaimed while rapidly moving his arms up and down in a fast motion, his eyes clenched shut and a pout on his face, momentarily making Iruka chuckle before confusion appeared on his face. Oh really now? Iruka asked with a raise of his right brow. Yeah, Mizuki-sensei told me that I had to take it, then learn a jutsu from it in order to become a true shinobi, otherwise I wouldn't have taken it in the first place. The good news though is that I managed to learn 1 or 2 moves from it. As Naruto told him this, Iruka's face morphed from anger to shock. He couldn't even deny that he was proud of the young blonde for learning a few jutsu from the forbidden scroll despite the situation, but then his shocked look had slowly changed into a look of suspicion. Now, if he were to take Naruto at his word, then that would mean that Mizuki had purposely fooled this young child onto stealing one of the village's most sacred treasures, which was treasonous, which was punishable by death, which Mizuki knew unless. Naruto, are you sure Mizuki told you this? Naruto nodded to confirm this, which caused Iruka's being to be filled with dread. Iruka couldn't possibly fathom that Mizuki, the man he'd grown up with, the man he had shed blood, sweat and tears with during many a mission, the man he had consoled when his girlfriend was forced to leave the village, would betray Konoha and frame a small child under the guise of getting to become a shinobi. But when Iruka heard a familiar whistle in the air, he leapt forward and tackled the now standing Naruto to the ground, saving the boy from being beheaded by the large shuriken that sunk into the tree a few feet away from them. I should have known you'd be here, Iruka. Iruka moved himself from Naruto's form as he simultaneously turned around to face Mizuki, who was standing on a tree branch with a large shuriken placed on his back, a sneer on the silver-haired man's face. I just don't understand why you would come for this thing, Mizuki continued before throwing a few smaller shurikens towards the two. Iruka saw the shurikens coming and managed to grab Naruto and leap into the air to avoid the shurikens. What the hell is going on, Mizuki? Iruka shouted out to his friend as he held Naruto close, only to jump to another branch to avoid more kunai that was aimed to kill him and his student. What do you think, you idiot? I'm getting what belongs to me, Mizuki told his longtime friend with a smug expression as pulled his large shuriken from his back and he leapt towards Iruka with his weapon high in the air. Fully intent of killing both him and Naruto, but Iruka rolled off of the branch and landed on the ground and tossed a few kunai towards the soaring Mizuki, but the Nukenin used his overly large weapon to stop the projectiles from piercing his body. I don't understand. Iruka shouted with anger as his gaze stayed solely on Mizuki's, who had landed on a tree branch that was closer to the ground. Why betray our village? Why try and set up Naruto for your heinous plot, Mizuki? Answer me. Mizuki let a frown form on his face at his former friend's stupid questions before jumping to a higher tree branch, tossing kunai at the two, only to grow angrier as Iruka avoided them, but then he managed to land a hit to Iruka's leg, making the man land on the tree branch to hold his leg in pain, letting go of Naruto in the process. Iruka-sensei, are you okay? Naruto asked in a panic as he watched his sensei wince while tearing the lone kunai out of his wounded leg. I'm fine, Naruto, don't you fret about me, Iruka told him in a soothing voice as he stood up on the branch shakily, keeping himself steady against the tree. I have to admit, Mizuki started as he landed on the branch across from the two Konoha inhabitants, with an impressed grin on his face. I'm significantly impressed that you're still trying, Iruka, despite the wound, and all the impressed look Mizuki had on his face changed. letting a smirk grace his features before shouting, "But let's see how far you can truly go." Iruka held the kunai that had pierced his leg and scowled before he and his opponent leapt towards each other and disappeared. Naruto didn't see the two Chunin, but he could hear metal clashing against each other, as well as various grunts and groans from both men, and felt his heart rate speed up. As the clash of steel got closer and closer until Iruka's form suddenly appeared before him along with Mizuki's form, both of their respective weapons were locked in a clash. "Iruka, I just don't get you," Mizuki said as he leaned close to Iruka's face with a sneer while Iruka matched the facial expression, keeping his weapon firmly locked against Mizuki's much larger one. "You know he's the cause of your parents' death and yet you still protect him. I'm sure Ruki-san and Kato-san are rolling around in their graves right now with a blazing look in his eyes." Iruka pushed Mizuki away from him with a boost of chakra then when he saw his former ally land on another branch. The Chunin launched himself towards Mizuki and landed a hard right to the man's face, and as Mizuki stumbled backwards, Iruka grabbed his head and slammed it hard into the tree, effectively sending Mizuki's entire body through the tree and sending him flying through the forest until his back slammed into another tree. "Don't you dare mention them, traitor," Iruka roared out before jumping towards where Mizuki was, but the silver-haired shinobi smirked at this and quickly performed the hand seals quickly before tossing his giant shuriken and shouting "Cage Shuriken no Jutsu." Seeing the large shuriken coming, Iruka managed to dodge the first one, but when he saw the second shuriken appear from the shadow of the first, Iruka landed on the tree branch below him and ducked to avoid it, and while he avoided losing his head, his right shoulder was hit. Iruka instinctively grabbed his now wounded shoulder and felt blood underneath his palm and inwardly swore in anger, but then he looked up to see Mizuki above him with his large shuriken in the air, ready to strike him down, so Iruka flipped off the branch mere moments before he was to be killed and landed on the ground before falling onto his right knee due to the wound in his leg. "But it is true, Iruka, you defend the demon without hesitation. The very same being that nearly razed this village to the ground," Mizuki exclaimed with unrelenting glee as he placed his shuriken on his back, only to pull out a kunai to point it at Iruka, and continued on with "My plan was simple. I get the forbidden scroll and give it my true leader, while setting up that blonde-haired monster, then kill it, becoming the grand hero of this worthless village, until Orochimaru-sama burned this to the ground, but you decided to interfere with my brilliant plan." "Demon? Monster? What are you talking about?" Naruto asked the silver-haired traitor with a look of confusion on his face, causing the already smug Nukenin to smirk wider. "Oh yeah, I forgot that you didn't know about this village's grand secret about you now." Despite the dangerous situation Naruto was currently in the middle of, his curiosity had gotten the better of him, and from the look Mizuki saw in Naruto's eyes, the Nukenin knew he had gotten the boy's attention. "Secret?" Naruto questioned to the man, who was now smirking widely. "Oh yes, little Naruto, a secret all about yo." Seeing the opportune moment to strike, Iruka dashed towards Mizuki and slammed his right elbow into the man's face, then followed up with a knee to his stomach before grabbing the man's head and ramming it against a tree, but Mizuki grabbed the wound on Iruka's leg, making the man yell out in pain, which was quickly silenced by his fist slamming into Iruka's face, which he then followed with a kunai stab into Iruka's chest, but with an annoyed growl, Iruka's body was replaced with a log which was split in half due to the immense force he had behind his thrusting hand. Iruka appeared next to Naruto and fell onto one knee, but forced himself to his feet, grabbed a scroll and handed it to Naruto, saying, "Naruto, get the scroll and get out of here quickly. Don't ask any questions, just go." "Where are you going, Naruto? I thought you wanted to hear the big secret that's all about you," Mizuki shouted just as Naruto was reaching out to grab the scroll from Iruka, making the young boy pause. Once again, Naruto's curiosity had gotten the best of him, but at the sound of Iruka's panicked voice saying "No, Naruto, don't listen to him, take the scroll and get out of here," had caused him to nod, take the scroll and start to run towards the path that led him here, but stopped when Mizuki shouted, "You're just doing what he wants, Naruto." The boy paused mid-step, then slowly looked back to Mizuki, causing Iruka to growl in frustration at Mizuki. "Naruto. Get out of here. Mizuki's just trying to trick you," he shouts out as he forced himself back to his feet. "Oh, I'm trying to trick you, Naruto. Iruka's been playing you from the start, trying to gain your trust, and do you want to know why? Because he plans to take revenge on you just like everyone else wants to in this village." Naruto stared at Mizuki, then back at the slowly advancing Iruka. The feeling of dread was spreading around him, but the boy turned back to Mizuki to ask, "What are you talking about? Do you know why everyone hates you, including your beloved Iruka-sensei?" Mizuki asked the boy with a grin as he leaped away to avoid the oncoming rain of kunai from Mizuki. "Naruto, get out of here now." Iruka yelled while Mizuki tossed his last large shuriken at Naruto. Mizuki smiled manically as he shouted, "Because you are the Kikbi no Kitsune." Naruto stood there, tears flowing from out of his eyes. He wasn't even aware that the large shuriken was coming at him. You are the creature that invaded Konoha 12 years ago and not only killed many shinobi and civilian alike, you killed Yu-sensei's parents and nearly crushed this village. You're the reason why the most beloved Hokage sacrificed himself to save this horrible place. You're the reason this all has happened, and now, you'll be the reason why I'll be hailed as the hero that killed the mighty beast itself. With that manic yell, Mizuki tossed multiple shuriken towards the horrified Naruto, who had fallen to his knees in despair. I'm the Kikbi no Kitsune. It can't be, he thought to himself as the shuriken was whizzing closer to him by the second. Iruka ran and threw himself in front of Naruto and took the group of shuriken in his back, which caused him to groan out in pain as he fell upon his student, sending them both to the ground in a heap, but then the wounded Chunin grabbed the now struggling and crying Naruto as well as the scroll and ran deep into the forest. Mizuki scowled at their escape, but then he gave a tiger-like smirk. He knew that Iruka was on his last leg and wouldn't be able to get far, so he let the weakened Chunin run, but he wouldn't get far. Iruka. Damn it, Naruto, stop struggling. Iruka shouted out as Naruto's squirming became more of an issue than before due to his small fists hitting the wound on Iruka's leg, as well as the boy's heel smashing against the edge of his newly made wound from one of shuriken that was sticking out from his back. Why did you save me, sensei? I killed your parents, I killed so many people, why? Naruto asked in a defeated tone as his body finally stopped its movements. Gone was his shining blue eyes and his foxy grin. Now the only thing that was left was dead faded blue eyes and the bitterest frown he'd ever seen on his student. Because you aren't the Kikbi, Iruka said as he finally fell on his knees, dropping Naruto and the scroll on the ground before falling face first onto the ground. Sensei, that's not true, Mizuki said. Naruto, listened very carefully because I'll only say this once. Iruka interjected quickly before the boy could start on the road of guilt for something he couldn't fully understand. Iruka dragged himself to a nearby tree and leaned on it, careful not to press the multiple shuriken deeper into his back, but he did manage to get one of the shuriken to sink deeper into his back, causing Iruka to groan as the intense pain caused his vision waver, but he forced his vision to steady to smile lightly at Naruto, whose tears were still flowing from his eyes. There was a time where I had thought about befriending you only to have my revenge against you for the death of my parents, as Mizuki had said, but at the same time, I also felt guilty for thinking that, so I went to the Hokage to talk to him about it, and I will never forget what he asked me, in regards to you being its jailer just because you live in a house. Does that mean that you are the house itself? At first I didn't know what he meant, but he decided to give me a mission to spend time with you, and I accepted that mission at first to understand who you were, but as I watched you grow, as I sat through your laughter, your tears, your frowns, your smiles, I realized what he meant. Iruka paused for a moment in order to cough hard, splattering blood on his hand, which worried Naruto greatly, but Iruka was determined to finish because he honestly felt that this would be his last chance to do so. You weren't the Kikbi, you were merely its host, and even to this day, I felt so ashamed by treating you the way I did back then. I treated you as the monster that killed thousands instead of you. You're not the Kikbi no Kitsune, you're Uzumaki. Naruto, the most hyperactive, loud-mouthed, kind-hearted trickster that I've grown to know and love as a son, and humbly apologize to you for all that I have done and felt about you before that day. Please, will you forgive this fool for his past transgressions? Naruto didn't know what to say to that. When Iruka first admitted that what Mizuki had said was true, made him want to run away, but then as Iruka continued, Naruto could see the tears falling from his sensei's eyes, and soon, his tears resurfaced, then grew tenfold as Iruka, the man he saw as a father, asked for forgiveness for his past mistakes, had really touched the blonde in his heart. How could he refuse something as heartfelt like that? Sensei, of course I forgive you, was there any doubt? Iruka smiled at the boy, mentally happy this Naruto's blue eyes were slowly regaining their natural shine, but then that all too familiar whistle was heard and it was getting closer by the second, but it wasn't coming from behind him nor above him, so where was it? Iruka then received his answer as a large shuriken flew from out of the darkness from the side, but it wasn't heading to him, it was heading for Naruto's form. Summoning all the energy he could, Iruka leaned forward and tackled Naruto to the ground, but the shuriken found its mark, hitting the side of Iruka's neck. Sinking into the Chunin deep enough where it would nearly decapitate him, but not enough to fully take his head off, but it had done its job. And at the moment, Naruto felt his entire life shatter like a broken glass. Imi no Iruka was no more. Cold. That's what Naruto was feeling right now as he gazed upon the now deceased figure of his sensei, not even aware that hot tears were falling down his face. Just earlier today, Iruka Umino was smiling, eating, yelling, and running, but most of all, he was alive, but now he was gone. Just like that. In Naruto's head, the smiling face of Iruka's was slowly fading away until his sensei's corpse was in its place. That's when Naruto heard chuckling coming from behind him that soon grew into an uncontrollable laughter. Oh, Iruka, pathetic, even upon death. With a slow, heavy breath that seemed to echo with the rage Naruto was feeling, the boy kneeled down to grab Iruka's kunai pouch, then tied it on his right thigh, before standing up and turning around to see the laughing Mizuki leaned against a tree, a kunai dangling from his right index finger. Now with him out of the way, hand me the scroll, and I promise you'll be seeing your sensei. So seeing red at the mention of his dead sensei, Naruto leapt at Mizuki to start his unrelenting assault, sending a flurry of sloppy punches and kicks while shouting, "I'm going to kill you, Mizuki." Only to have Mizuki dodge most if not all of them. "Aw, the little demon is trying to avenge his sensei, how cute." Mizuki shouted out as he kneed Naruto in his stomach, taking the breath out of the young child. Naruto fell to the ground in a small ball, struggling to gain his breath, but Mizuki grabbed him by his hair and rammed the boy's face into his knee before grabbing the boy's head and slammed it hard into the ground repeatedly with an insane laugh. Mizuki then lifted Naruto's head back up and smirked down at the now bloody face of the boy and asked, "What do you have to say now, demon?" Before tossing him hard towards Iruka's body. Naruto coughed heavily as he wrapped an arm around his stomach, his forehead touching the ground with pain etched on his face. Naruto knew that he was overmatched. He wasn't even a shinobi, and here he was trying to fight a Chunin. But he knew that while he was unskilled, he had something up his sleeve. As Naruto struggled to get on his knees, he was suddenly and rather brutally kicked in his stomach, hard enough for him to roll repeatedly, before slowly stopping near his dead sensei, but he tried to rise off the ground again, only to be lifted up by the front of his jumpsuit by the traitor who raised him high into the air and with boisterous maniacal voice. He shouted, "It's time for this game to end, Kickby." In response to being called the Kickby, Naruto licked up the blood that was flowing from his mouth and spat it in Mizuki's face, which surprised the silver-haired man before his face melted into a look of rage. "You filthy mongrel." Mizuki barked out before his free fist shot out and slammed into Naruto's stomach repeatedly, not only causing blood to fly from Naruto's lips, but making Mizuki grin savagely at the pain he was causing the demon. After landing a final punch to Naruto's face, Mizuki twisted his body around and tossed the preteen towards a tree, where Naruto bounced off of it and fell to the ground, right behind a large green bush. Knowing that the Naruto was pretty much done, Mizuki plucked a large shuriken from Iruka's neck and slowly stalked his way to the bush, saying, "Come on out, Naruto-kun, it's time we end our game." But what he didn't expect was a large smoke to overcome the entire area. When the smoke faded away, Mizuki looked on in shock as over 24 Narutos were crouching in the trees above him, each one with a dangerous gleam in their eyes, but Mizuki wasn't scared. "Oh, look at this, the demon can make replicas. It's a pity, however, that while you have these are fake." "That's where you're wrong, Mizuki team." Naruto howled out as he crawled out of the bush weakly before two clones helped him onto his feet. "These aren't regular bushins. These are cage bushins." Mizuki let surprise crack through his insane visage, but as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared back into the insane expression as he said, "Cage bushin, so these are true clones, big deal demon. You may have the numbers behind you, but I have the experience, the training, the power. You are nothing compared to me." When he shouted at them, all of clones as well as the original narrowed their cold, empty eyes at him and slowly stood up in the trees they were standing on, while the original Naruto leaned against his two clones, where he then, with the coldest voice he could, merely told his clones to kill him. Mizuki grinned at this and spun his shuriken. Then as the clones leapt towards him, Mizuki began to spin around at a fast pace, spinning the shuriken over his head to destroy 5 clones, then he placed the spinning shuriken down to his chest to split the next 7 clones in half, dispelling them. He then flipped into the air to avoid 2 clones with kunai in their hands and landed on their faces, then flipped off of them to decapitate them both, then with a twist of his body, he kicked 2 more clones in the chest, then spun the shuriken to cut the downed clones in half, where then laughed darkly, facing the 8 remaining clones as well as the original. Well, look at this. Not a scratch on me. Now come and let finish you off." Mizuki used his shuriken to block 3 of the clones' kunai, then used his weapon to slice through 2 of them, before stabbing the last one in the chest, but he didn't have time to stop because the remaining clones and Naruto jumped into the fray, raining down blows upon Mizuki, who was using his weapon to block their blows while trying to cut down the true Naruto, but was stopped by a clone. "Damn it," swore Mizuki as he dodged an overhead kick, only to find his face being rammed into the true Naruto's knee, but then he countered by jumping in the air and kneeing Naruto under his chin, sending the Uzumaki high into the air where Mizuki threw his shuriken. Only for a clone to leap up and take the shot, while another clone grabbed Naruto and flung him back to Mizuki, where he then delivered a punch towards the traitor, only to curse as Mizuki dodged it and countered by kneeing a clone in his face, before grabbing another clone's head and drove it into the ground before stabbing it in the head with a kunai. Mizuki snarled as he faced down the last 5 clones and Naruto as he pulled 2 kunai from his pouch and gripped them tightly, then with a grin, he dashed forward while Naruto and his clones followed, and when they met in the middle, the real Naruto leapt over Mizuki and kicked the back of his head while 2 clones slid on the ground and grabbed Mizuki's ankles, then pulled back, making him fall forward where his face met with the ground, but then, 2 clones grabbed his arms and held them down, while the last clone and Naruto jumped in the air and slammed their knees into his back hard, making him yell in pain only for the clone and Naruto to begin to stomp down on the man's back. After the first few stomps, Mizuki could feel his ribs breaking, but he managed to shake off the clones holding his feet, then with a loud roar, he broke his arms free, grabbed the feet stomping down on his chest and tossing them off of him before grabbing 2 kunai he had dropped and effortlessly killed the 2 clones by his arms, then he threw the projectiles between the eyes of the 2 clones before flipping onto his feet and turning around while simultaneously pulling out another kunai to stab right between the eyes of the last clone, but thanks to the smoke of the now dispelled clone, Mizuki was temporarily blinded where Naruto gained the advantage by jumping on Mizuki's chest, where he then began to relentlessly punch the traitor's face, with hot tears pouring down his face, until he could feel Mizuki's blood on his hands, but all he only saw Ruka's dead body and the person who was now pleading for his life after every punch was the man that had killed him, causing him to continue the onslaught with renewed fury until Mizuki's breathing completely stopped. Panting heavily, Naruto gazed down at Mizuki's completely bloodied face and felt his gaze lingering on it, staring at the blood that flowed down the silver-haired man's face and closed his eyes as he looked up into the air, breathing in the smell of blood, but he then opened his eyes and lifted his right hand over his face and seeing Mizuki's blood drip from off his right hand and onto his whisker marks on his face in an hypnotized glance. "Blood, how wonderful, isn't it, Naruto-kun?" A cold, dark, surprisingly female voice was heard asking in a whisper inside of Naruto's head, who was completely unaware that when the voice spoke, his blue eyes had flashed into a deep crimson. Naruto was so mesmerized by the blood on his hands that he didn't realize 2 things. 1. He didn't notice the voice that rang through his head, and 2. That one of Mizuki's eyes had opened and that the man had kept the kunai in his hand instead of dropping it when he had fallen on the ground. "But the grip of the kunai," Mizuki shouted, "die, demon," while thrusting the kunai into the mesmerized boy's chest hard, nearly piercing Naruto's heart. Naruto gasped out in surprise and pain as he numbly looked down and noticed the kunai in his chest, where Mizuki took the chance to twist the kunai in his chest, which made him yell out in pain until Mizuki swiftly pulled the knife out and sent it straight into Naruto's throat. Naruto suddenly fell to the ground, his now blue eyes slowly changing into a deep, soulless black. Mizuki grinned as he pulled both of the kunai out of the dying boy and rolled the dying boy off of him. He then stood up and watched Naruto's eyes continue to fade and decided to kick the dying boy in the face in retribution for messing up his beautiful face. After a few more kicks, Mizuki walked towards the scroll and closed it up before tying a rope around it and slinging it around his shoulder. He looked back at the boy on the ground and sneered before he began to walking away. Victoriously. "Naruto-kun." Naruto squirmed when he heard the voice while closing his eyes tightly, feeling the gentle warmth around his entire being, as if he was being embraced, but instead of being afraid of this odd sensation, he felt at peace, he felt protected, and most of all, he felt love from this gentle here. "Wake up, Naruto-kun." Then he blinked and opened his eyes to find himself staring up at a blue sky with white petals floating over his eyes. He then leaned up off the ground and let out a gentle whoa while smiling gently. He wasn't in the deep dark forest of Konoha anymore. Instead, he found himself sitting in an open field with a beautiful blue sky with white clouds that had white petals soaring all around him, and a soft breeze of air suddenly flowed around his body, and as he stood up to dust off his pants, that was when he noticed what he was wearing. Instead of his orange jumpsuit, he was wearing a white shirt, as well as white pants and white fingerless gloves that had a gold spiral etched into it. "How am I wearing this?" Naruto asked himself in confusion. "Because I choose it out for you, Naruto-kun." Naruto froze when the warm and loving voice was heard behind him, and once he turned around to face the person, he came to see a beautiful middle-aged woman with warm blue eyes, long red hair and a long flowing white gown with a gold trim around the edges of her sleeves and dress that also had a golden spiral on the dress. Naruto tried to speak but found the angel touching his lips as if to quiet him. "You've grown so much, Naruto-kun," she said softly, tears falling from her eyes as she stared at him. Naruto looked at the angel strangely but still couldn't speak. "I'm sorry we had to meet like this, Naruto-kun, but I guess this was bound to happen sooner or later." She spoke to him while she touched his throat and suddenly found himself able to speak. "Who in the hell are you, lady, and why couldn't I speak, and why are you calling me Naruto-kun?" Naruto yelled at her. Only one person could call him Naruto-kun, and sadly, he knew he would never hear that come from her mouth ever again. That's when he noticed the woman laughing gently, which he had to admit was a very wonderful sound. "What's so funny?" Naruto yelled as she touched his head, calming him down. It's just funny, you remind me so much of me and yet, so much of your father at the same time, she said gently as Naruto's mind started to work. He reminds her so much of herself and his father. Did that mean she was his? No. That was impossible. This woman couldn't be his mother. His mother had died during the Kyuubi rampage, the Hokage told him, but at the same time, something in his heart had told him that he was staring at his birth mother, and that filled him with tears. Are you my Aka-san? Naruto asked her slowly, his voice holding so much confusion and sadness, but hope was in it as well. Without any sudden warning, the woman softly wrapped her arms around the boy with a loving but sad smile on her face, as she responded with I'm Uzumaki Kushina, one of the top shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato, and Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto, you are my son. Naruto gently pulled away from her body and slowly touched her cheeks with shaking hands, and once he felt her warm skin beneath them, he felt the tears welled up in his eyes, before feeling them fall onto his cheeks. He didn't know how or why, but his mother was right in front of him, and for that one moment, Iruka's death had left his mind as he embraced and cried to his mother's chest while shouting Aka-san. I'm here my little Naruto-kun, I'm right here, she consoled him while swaying him side to side, holding his form gently until his tears stopped. How are you here? Aji-san told me that you died during the Kyuubi attack, Naruto asked after he managed to stop his tears, releasing his hold on her, but then he watched as she stepped back to capture his face in between her hands, and with a serious but sad tone in her face, she told him I did little Naruto-kun, which shocked him completely, but then these next few words shocked him even more. And if things don't go well here you will too. See, can you run that by me again? That was the first thing that came from the shell-shocked boy's mouth as he stared at his mother with wide eyes. Now, out of everything he was expecting to hear, hearing that not only that she was dead, but he was dying as well was certainly not one of them. You are in the middle of life and death, Naruto-kun, and if you don't pass this test you will die, she answered him with a serious tone, but Naruto merely crossed his arms. Okay, so Akashina let out a wonderful whisper of a laugh while covering her mouth with her right palm for a moment, only to move it away. When any good being passes on, their souls are brought here to Tamashii Nahara, Soul Field. Normally when it comes to your case, you would be transferred to an area like this. When she stretched out her right arm, she lifted up her index finger and remained silent. For a moment, Naruto looked to the horizon, seeing as she was pointing towards it, but without warning, the area in front of her body where she was pointing began to ripple as if tossing a stone into the river. Shock just wasn't a good enough emotion for Naruto anymore, as the area in front of his mother then decided to change with every ripple, until he was staring at a plane similar to the one he was standing with the exception of the clear blue sky. It was a pitch black, and instead of green grass that was beneath his feet, the ground was rippling lightly, which made him realize that it was water. Even though the water's reflection showed the multicolored stars that were glowing faintly in the sky. Whoa. This is the Hansei Kakauki, reflection plane, Kushina murmured to her child, who looked at her with eyes bright with confusion, which she smiled at and continued. This is the place where every soul will visit when they die to think back on their choices before meeting Shinigami-sama for their final resting place. Without any warning, Kushina lowered her hand, closing the hole she had made to the alternate dimension, before turning to him to say, the reason you aren't over there is because when an Uzumaki is close to death, they come here to gain another chance. But how? Naruto asked her, confusion evident in his eyes, which caused her to look at the many petals soaring in the gentle breeze before gazing back down at her son and said, the only way you can return to the land of the living is when you activate our clans. Jutsu. Naruto couldn't believe what he was hearing. Not only did he have a clan, he had a bloodline as well. What's it called? Naruto asked curiously, his eyes shining with excitement. She felt herself smile as she remembered the way her husband had smiled when she had told him she was pregnant. It's called the Kaigan, Fighting Spirit Eye. The name is quite fitting for our clan, really, she said as Naruto grinned before waiting for her to continue. When our village, Uzumaki no Sato, was just in its infant stages, we quickly gained an enemy that served the god of destruction and death, Jashin. We do not know why the Jashinists wanted to invade our growing village, but we soon found that despite our longevity, we began to lose the war. We began to pray to our god, Bishamon, for any way to combat these living incarnations of chaos. She then let her eyes drift close for a moment, and when they opened, her pupil had become onyx and inside of them held the shape of a shuriken, but the points were elongated and was also sharp and aggressive looking, and where the hole of the shuriken would normally be, there was an electric blue spiral instead. Naruto's eyes had become even wider than before at the look of his clan's jutsu. And what we had gotten in return was the Kaigan. Because of this jutsu, we were able to defeat the Jashinists, but at a severe cost, for when a Kaigan user dies, their souls pass down to become a spirit that powers the Kaigan, and if you overuse it too much, that spirit will die and be sent to Hansei Kakauki, never to reunite with their loved ones. You mean those stars? Kushina spared her son a sad smile and nodded, which caused Naruto to bow his head, but when his mother began to speak again, Naruto raised his head to pay attention. But that is not all. When a user of the Kaigen passes on, their soul is added to Bishaman's collection, which he will use to shape a new spirit, as well as the element the past user used in their life to become a new spirit for a new Kaigen user. What happens to the old spirits when the past user dies? Kushina didn't need to say anything, but the sad look in her eyes made Naruto look down once more. They go to that lonely place, don't they? At Kushina's nod, Naruto punched his fist into his palm and shouted, there must be a way to free these spirits from this unfair fate. There is a way, but you must fight and beat them in a battle to the death. What's the catch to that? Naruto asked, knowing it couldn't be that easy, and he was proven right when Kushina looked towards the sky and replied, when you fight a Kaigen spirit, they are forced to fight at their full strength. If you win, they become truly free of their tragic fate, but if you were to lose, then not only do their souls go to that place, but yours does as well. Wanting to quickly change the subject, Kushina sat down, causing Naruto to immediately follow her motion. Now pay attention, Naruto-kun. Do you see the color of my Kaigen? Naruto nodded. Well, this mode is called Sonic mode. It represents speed and agility, and its element is lighting. The blue shuriken in the middle of her eyes changed from blue to red, and the spiral color changed to crimson. This is Berserker mode. It represents strength and power, and its elements is fire, earth and magma, a mix of the two. She then closed her eyes and then opened them. Her entire eyes were completely black, and the pupil was silver with shuriken now black, and the spiral white, and this is Reaper mode. It represents stealth. Its elements are air and darkness. Her eyes then changed back to normal right in front of her son, who was stunned but happy. Wow, that was awesome. So, how can I achieve in getting this ninjutsu? Naruto asked after coming down from the awe of seeing his mother showing him her Kaigen, but then he frowned heavily when he saw how serious she looked. If you do this, then you will have no choice but to do it, no matter what it is. Do you understand that? She asked before she noticed the determined look in his eyes. Yes, he said before steeling himself for anything, because unlike being in the academy, he had a very strong feeling that there wouldn't be another shot if he failed. Plus, he had a strong feeling what it would be if he failed, and it involved that dark voice. Alright Aka-san, what must I do? Naruto asked as Kushina closed her eyes, and when she opened it, her Kaigen was in Sonic mode. In order to obtain the Kaigen, you must fight to defeat me. Naruto looked at his mother in shock. After 14 long years without his mother, he had just found her, but now he has to fight her in order to live. Naruto knew that either way, he loses. Before Naruto could think about his plan of attack, he had to dodge a quick blow from his mother, only to walk right into a kick to the ribs. Naruto stumbled to the left and managed to lift up his right arm to block her oncoming kick, and he quickly countered with his fist, only to hit air. You're not taking this seriously enough, Naru-chan, he heard her voice say before she reappeared, sending a hard kick to his face, sending him sprawling to the ground. She's right, but I can't take this seriously. How can I fight my own mother? I just got to meet her. Naruto screamed inside his head while his mother disappeared again. Naruto looked around the wide area only to narrowly dodge her fist aiming at her face. Naruto quickly got back on his feet, put Slacked into a sloppy defensive stance, and stared at his mother, his eyes clearly showing how he doesn't want to fight her. Aka-san, I can't fight you, he said softly as he stepped out of his defensive stance and sighed. She closed her eyes as tears fell from them before she spoke. Naruto-kun, I don't want to fight you either, but I want you to live your life, alive. Not be in that dark area until the end of time. Naruto nodded before frowning deeply. He knew he couldn't fight her the way he had fought that bastard Mizuki. That's right. Mizuki is still alive. What am I doing? Iruka-sensei has always been there for me when I needed him. I can't give up now, but still, she is my mother, Naruto thought to himself before he looked at her again, only to realize she was gone, and then the place he was in started to shimmer, and there he found himself standing in the middle of the forest. He looked around as a shocked look was etched upon his face. I know I didn't dream that, but how did I get back here? He asked himself before noticing two things. 1. Iruka's body was gone, and 2. A large shuriken was heading his way. Naruto ducked the large shuriken, then looked at the person who threw it, and rage filled his soul as he saw Mizuki standing there with his large shuriken in his hands. Mizuki suddenly threw the shuriken only to watch Naruto move to the side and charge at him. Mizuki gave a smile, Naruto a smile before running towards him, but before they met head-on, Mizuki suddenly vanished, leaving Naruto punching the air and confused. Mizuki suddenly appeared and punched Naruto, tried to punch Naruto in his stomach, but Naruto caught his fist and smirked before delivering a hard punch to Mizuki's face, sending Mizuki to the ground, but Naruto wasn't finished. He then made 3 cage bushins and whispered in their ears before all 4 of them gave an evil smirk. 2 clones jumped in the air and delivered 2 rib-busting kicks to Mizuki's chest and held his arms down. The third clone threw the real Naruto into the air before he ran over and jumped slightly into the air before elbowing Mizuki in the chest, then he moved away and held his legs down. Naruto gave a smirk before making a few seals and saying please let this work. Bushin Bakuha. Suddenly, the three clones glowed until a huge explosion erupted, sending Naruto backwards into the air and crashing hard into the ground. Naruto sat himself up and when the smoke cleared, Naruto smiled. There was no sign of Mizuki team, only a huge crater. But what Naruto didn't know, Mizuki was slowly rising from a shadow from a tree behind him. Naruto was suddenly kicked hard in the back, sending him hovering over the crater and into a tree, and then he found himself falling into the crater and landing hard inside the crater. After a few minutes, Naruto jumped out of the crater with more than 50 of his clones and charged at Mizuki, but before they could reach him, a black shadow enveloped the ground and all of the clones fell through it. Naruto's temper was rising as Mizuki motioned for him to get over here, but Naruto could not. Naruto then flipped him the bird while thinking, the bastard couldn't do all of this before, so how can he now? Naruto didn't even notice that Mizuki's eyes were pitch black on the exception of his silver pupils and the purple Fuma shuriken in the middle. Without warning, Mizuki ran over the huge gaping shadow on the ground and elbowed Naruto in his face, making Naruto stumble, but then he grabbed Naruto's head and began to punch Naruto in his face and in his stomach. Naruto was completely overwhelmed as he took blow after blow on his body until Mizuki grabbed Naruto by his head and slammed it into the ground, making a small crater. Mizuki let go of his head softly, a sad look in his eyes as he reached for his head again, but before he could grab it, Naruto poofed into thin air. Mizuki stared in shock before feeling two fists place themselves into his stomach. Mizuki stumbled back as two hands rose from the ground and rooted him down to the ground. Mizuki then felt two kunai digging themselves into his shoulders and another two in his stomach. Mizuki then smirked before his skin turned pitch black and fell to the ground as if it was liquid. Naruto growled as he rose from the ground and stood up with the help of his clones. Damn it. He seems to know everything we do before we do it. Naruto yelled as he looked around until his mind shifted. He noticed every time Mizuki was trapped or during battle, he was always near a shadow. That's it. After summoning 10 clones, since the Bushin Bakuha weakened him, he hinged them into the trees. Now, we play the waiting game, Naruto thought as he crossed his arms and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Mizuki jumped out of the shadows and into the air, only to be stopped by a tree branch. Naruto jumped in the air and delivered a vicious kick to Mizuki's side, but Mizuki blocked it only to get hit in the face by Naruto's knee. Mizuki winced as he felt the knee impact on his face, but despite being upside down, he was able to push Naruto away from him before reaching his hand out towards the sky, and suddenly, a shadow sprouted from the ground and engulfed Mizuki's hand and sharpened like a blade. Mizuki Thurn used the shadow to cut the branch that held him, only to be surprised when the entire tree poofed out of existence. Naruto could believe what he had saw. He had watched Mizuki use a shadow to destroy his henge cage Bushin. Mizuki landed on the ground gently as smiled at his now scowling opponent, but soon he frowned. Mizuki then charged at the Uzumaki, but before he reached him, another tree swung its large branch, only to be dispelled by Mizuki's shadow blade. Naruto scowled as he saw Mizuki come closer with his shadow blade, poised and ready to strike him, so Naruto blocked only to see Mizuki vanishing into thin air. Naruto felt the hairs on his neck stand up, but before he could do anything, he suddenly felt pain on his back. Naruto turned his head only to see a long bloody gash on his back. Naruto then felt more gashes appear on his body until he was in the air in a black tornado, getting bruised, gashed and weakened. After a few minutes of this pain, Naruto crashed into the ground in pain and tried to get up, only to see two sandals in front of him. Naruto struggled to rise his, but when he did, he found the shadow blade inches in front of his face. "Do you submit?" A voice asked him while the blade stayed still in front of Naruto's face. Naruto for once in his life wanted to give up, but then his mind drifted back onto his now dead sensei, Iruka. I can't give up. Iruka sensei didn't give up to save me, and now he's dead. If he had given up, I would have died. Besides, if I was to fall here, his death would have been for nothing, and I can't allow that. Naruto thought before he glared up defiantly at his enemy. No, I will never give up even if my body turns to dust, Naruto said. So be it, the voice said before Naruto closed his eyes and awaited his demise. Naruto suddenly felt his strength come back to him and all of his wounds were being healed. After 5 minutes, Naruto was completely healed. Naruto stood up and looked at Mizuki with a confused look on his face. Why did you heal me? Mizuki then smiled before his image shimmered into an image Naruto knew well already. Aka-san, you were Mizuki, she smiled as Naruto began to completely freak out over this development, only to stop and look at her. Why did you change into the bastard? She grinned before she turned around and looked at the sky. Since you wouldn't fight me like how I am now, I changed into the person you despise. Real simple really, she answered as Naruto nodded. Then he asked, how did you know I hated Mizuki? She grinned and then pointed to her eyes. The Kaigan wisdom mode can read people's mind to some extent, she answered again before he asked, hold on. Wisdom mode? I thought Sonic, Berserker and Reaper were the only ones. There are more than those. She nodded her head and explained, yes, those three are the only ones, but there is only one mode that only you can have. Since I was always good at reading people's movements and emotions, the Kaigan made wisdom mode just for me. No other Uzumaki clan member can have it, only I can, she said with a smile before she noticed him frowning. Well, I guess I'll never know, he said with a deep frown on his face. Before she could ask, he continued. I couldn't defeat you in this form, and I couldn't defeat you as Mizuki. I failed the challenge and now I'm going to go to that place. He looked down only to hear her laugh hard. Naruto scowled. What was so funny about his soul being stuck in such a depressing place? I was kidding around, Naruto-kun, she said after her laughter died down. You were kidding, then what was the point of all of this? He yelled at her as she giggled at his red face. Her face then took a serious turn before she said, this entire thing was to see if you would give up. You showed me that you would never give up. Even when you fought someone that is way stronger than you were, you still never gave up, and that was the real test which you passed. Naruto stared at her for a second before a wide grin enveloped his face. I passed. I get to live after all. Naruto yelled as he hugged his mother with fury as she laughed and hugged him back. After a few minutes, Naruto let go of his mom and asked, so what happens now? She smiled and placed her hands over his eyes and whispered, this will hurt, Naruto-kun, so brace yourself. Naruto nodded before he felt an intense pain in his eyes. She removed her hands from over his eyes and stared at him sadly as he rolled around on the ground, screaming in pure pain while holding his eyes. This lasted for 2 hours until Naruto was unconscious on the ground. She sat down and put his head in her lap before humming a gently tune, petting his head until the time he awoken. After Naruto awakened 1 hour later, he was staring at her and noticed that the area around her was completely blurry, but she wasn't. She gave him a smile before she said, looks like you've awakened Kaigan. Sonic mode. I'm surprised really. I thought you would have Berserker mode. Naruto stared at her, confused until she held up a mirror which appeared out of nowhere and noticed that his eyes looked like his Kasen's eyes when her Kaigan was in Sonic mode. So, I got Sonic mode randomly? Naruto asked before she shook her head. No. It's not that. Kaigan chooses which trait you're greater with. Since you're faster than most people, the Kaigan you activated was Sonic mode. She explained as best as she could. Naruto nodded, then looked around as the area started to shine brighter. What's happening? Naruto asked as he looked around only to see his mother frowning. He suddenly understood. It was time for him to return to the real world. Naruto suddenly ran and hugged his mother as hard as he could as the place grew brighter. She hugged him back with as much force as she could as she whispered, we'll be together again one day. Naruto nodded as tears fell from his eyes before he had to watch her slowly walk back away from him, her form glowing brightly until it became an orb, then the orb morphed into a flower petal, and before he could do anything, all of the flower petals swarmed around him wildly, all of them glowing brightly, and before he knew it, his eyes snapped open to the side of the forest, but as he laid there, staring at the bright moon, he could hear her say. No matter what happens from here on out, I'll always be by your side, my Naruto-kun. Naruto slowly rose to his feet with a huge headache and tears falling from his eyes. He had done it. He was alive and he had the Kaigan, but he wasn't sure that he had activated it. Was it all just a dream? He thought to himself with a dismayed look on his face. Was it truly all a dream? And if it was a dream, then maybe he had a chance to grab the scroll and get out of here before Iruka and Mizuki showed up, but as he looked around the area for the scroll, he saw Iruka's deceased body nearby and felt his hopes drop as well, but at the same time, they rose as well. So it wasn't a dream after all, Naruto told himself, but to be honest, he didn't know how he felt about that. Should he be glad that it all wasn't a dream? That he had met his mother and received his ninjutsu, or should he be sad that Iruka was still dead and it was entirely his fault? But then the smell of fresh blood invaded his face and he nearly gagged at it, but then he looked down and saw that his orange jacket had a gigantic soaking red spot on his chest, and when he touched the spot, it was still very wet. He knew that when he was with his mom, time seemed to pass slowly, but here, it was as if 5 minutes had passed. That means I haven't failed yet. I may have started all of this, but I will not allow myself to let the scroll getting taken, and with that, Naruto started to run, but then his vision began to swim and without any warning, he blacked out. Naruto opened his eyes in confusion, but then he let a groan leave his lips. I have to stop doing this, Naruto hissed out as he continued to stare up at the sky until he then tilted his head. The sky isn't supposed to look like that, Naruto thought as he looked at the odd sky. The sky above him was a dark blue. In the sky were rows of light, think the northern lights in the sky, its colors changing from light blue to dark blue every second. Naruto stood up and looked around the area he was in and noticed that he saw the sky on the ground. Naruto then looked under him but only saw himself staring back at him, wearing the same confused look that was on his face. "Where am I?" Naruto asked out loud only to hear his voice echo until it faded away into the distance. Naruto couldn't understand what he was doing there, but he needed to get out. He had a chance to try and make things right, and being in this place was not helping his chances, so Naruto got up on his feet and began to look around until a voice that was not his own said, "Hey, if you need to get out, I'll help you out." Alarmed by the sudden voice, Naruto spun around until a man with short black hair that reached his back, blue eyes that matched Naruto's own, a medium-sized scar that went down diagonally his right eye, a black-colored haori that was open, so Naruto could see his battle-scarred chest and medical wrap that was wrapped along his stomach. And he also wore a midnight blue hakama with a light blue lighting design at the end near his feet that seemed to come alive whenever the wind blew. Naruto stared at this man and felt an air of aura around him. As if he was someone of royalty like a prince or even a king. But before Naruto could ponder on it anymore, the man grinned and said, "So you're my new container, nah? You seem tough enough," he said with an upbeat tone as he looked Naruto up and down, before adding a little on the short side, "But you'll do." Naruto grinned before he heard that last comment which pissed him off. If there was anything Naruto hated more than anything, it was being called short. "Short, say that to my face." Naruto shouted before the man bended down, so he was face to face with Naruto, and said, "You are show." Before he could finish his sentence, he was punched square in the jaw, sending him high up into the air and crashing down on the mirror-like ground. The man leaned up off the ground and looked at Naruto, rubbing his wounded jaw before he grinned. "Impressive. That punch came so fast, I didn't expect it. I can tell you're going to be exciting to work with," the man said before he flipped back up to his feet and began to swipe the imaginary dust off of his clothes. "Work with? What do you mean by that?" Naruto asked while he watched the man yawn slightly while digging in his right ear, clearly bored now. The man grinned as he walked towards Naruto and pointed at the blonde's eyes, confusing the kid to no end. "I'm your Kaigen Sonic mode, kiddo. Kasu's is the name and speed is my game," the man now known as Kasu said as Naruto tilted his head in shocked state. This man was his Kaigen Sonic mode. How could that be? "You might be wondering how I could be Sonic mode, right?" Kasu asked as he watched the boy nod in response. "Well, whenever you activate me or any of the spirits, your body will merge with ours. Our mind also will be fused together, so even though you'll be in control, it'll be us thinking the same thoughts and feeling the same thing. We're basically one person the moment you activate the Kaigen." Naruto soaked up what Kasu had told him and gave a wry grin. "How when they say fighting spirit they really mean it," Naruto said with a grin before asking, "So, is there anything else that you can do other than give me speed and agility?" Kasu gave a huge smile in reply to this and said, "Hold out your right arm and open up your hand," Kasu said while Naruto looked at him before shrugging his arms and doing what he was told. Then suddenly, Kasu changed into a small blue orb and put himself into Naruto's right hand and changed into a katana with black metal and a light blue lightning bolt on each side of it. While Naruto swung the katana around a few times before holding it with both of his hands. "So you can become a weapon too?" Naruto asked himself only to hear Kasu's voice all around him. "Yeah, but the bad part is that you have to be in Sonic mode in order to use me as a weapon. We'll still be combined, but only difference is that I'm a sword." Kasu explained to the boy. "Well said." Boy opened his hand and watched the sword glow before it changed back into a small blue orb. "Then how can you do it now when I haven't activated the Kaigen yet?" The blue orb floated a few feet from Naruto and changed back into the form of Kasu. "Because you goof, this my dimension." He grinned at the blonde boy before continuing on with that form. "Well, powerful, takes a lot out of both of us, so despite your stamina, we won't be able to use it right away. With training, we can minimize the stress factor, but until then, try not to use it a lot." Kasu then looked up at the blue waves of light then back towards the blonde, who was grinning, which caused him to grin and say, "Yeah, this is going to be great. I can just feel it," which caused Naruto's grin to widen. "So, what's your element affinity?" Naruto looked at Kasu when he asked this question and found out he really didn't know. Hell, Naruto didn't even know what that was. Maybe he should have listened to Iruka when he taught them this. "I have no clue," Naruto told him honestly, making Kasu look at him with a shocked expression before the spirit sighed and told him, "Well kid, looks like our time is up," Kasu said as Naruto frowned. Naruto didn't want to leave yet. He needed to know more about his ninjutsu and the spirit that was in front of him. "I want to know more," Naruto said as Kasu grinned at the kid. He could see a lot of himself in him, but time was running short. "Sorry kid, but when you come back, I'll tell you more, but I suggest you find out what your element affinity is before you do, but before that you have a job to do, remember?" Suddenly, Naruto let out a deep growl. He was so caught up in learning a few things about his Kaigen spirit that he had totally forgot about why he had even gotten his spirit in the first place. It seems like we'll get to test our teamwork after all. Kasu couldn't but smirk at the boy's words. This was going to be exciting, he just knew it. Then let's not waste any time. Suddenly, Naruto felt the glass-like ground starting to break beneath his feet. Getting panicked by this, Naruto opened his mouth to ask what was going on, but the glass broke beneath him completely, sending him falling into the void, screaming until his body was soon enveloped by the everlasting darkness, but before he was fully enveloped, he heard Kasu say. "See you on the other side." Real world. Naruto woke up with a strangled gasp while pushing his body off the ground and onto his feet, where he then shook his head. Now that strange thing had to be a dream, but he was soon proven wrong once more when a voice in his head suddenly asked, "Partner, your head on straight." Naruto flinched in surprise at the voice, but he realized that it was Kasu and said, "So it wasn't a dream again." He heard his new partner laughing at this. "No way, this isn't a dream luckily, but I think it's time for us to team up to stop them." Naruto nodded at this and took a small breath before closing his eyes, saying, "I just hope this works, Kasu." Kaigen. Sonic mode. The moment Naruto said these words, he felt a burst of chakra shoot out from his body almost painfully into his eyes, and it nearly sent him to his knees from the sudden pain, but then it had stopped. Then, he felt better. He felt the chakra flowing through and around his body, become like a raging storm. His vision was more crisp, more clearer, more sharper, but the downside of it was that his vision was a slight tint of blue. "Whoa," the dual voice of Naruto and Kasu murmured before his hand flew over his mouth. Was that his voice? "This is pretty strange," he stated after uncovering his mouth with a slow blink of his eyes, but then he smirked. "But it's fucking cool as well," he exclaimed before narrowing his eyes. He knew that he would need to catch up with Mizuki quickly or else he would miss his only chance to stop him, so after sparing a look towards his departed sensei, he told the body, "Don't worry sensei, I'll stop Mizuki's plot," before speeding off into the forest at high speed, needing to catch up with the traitor. Outside the forest. Mizuki smiled arrogantly as he strolled out of the opening in the forest. He had the scroll and killed two people he despised more than anything in his life. Now all he needed to do was to get the scroll to Orochimaru, then he would be promoted as a Chunin of Itagikur no Sado, but he would also steal a few jutsu from himself. Even if he was captured by Konoha's Anbu, he would be paraded as a hero throughout the village for killing the Kyuubi. He would then explain how he caught the demon child killing his sensei in a fit of anger for not promoting him to Genin. Yes, that would be a perfect explanation. Mizuki grinned when he saw the hooded figure waiting for him and for the scroll. Everything he had done, everything he planned to do was coming to him, step by step. "I see you made it," the hooded figure said as Mizuki slowly grabbed the scroll and held it out as he walked closer to the hooded figure. "We had a deal, remember?" Mizuki replied when he got close to the hooded figure, who was staring at the scroll. "You were successful. Orochimaru-sensei will be pleased with this. It took a lot of work, but I managed to get it in the end." The figure looked at the ton of blood on Mizuki's Chunin vest and merely chuckled but didn't say anything else. Instead, he turned his head and uttered a few words before a purple portal appeared behind him, red bolts of lightning streaking across it. "Then let us part from his village before we're caught." Mizuki smirked and tossed the scroll up and down in his hand arrogantly with a laugh, while saying, "How can they catch us when we're 1 foot away from leaving? Face it, we're home free." Moments before the scroll fell back into his hand, an orange and yellow blur grabbed the scroll, which surprised the two men, but then a voice behind them called out, "Sorry team, this scroll belongs to Konohagakure no Sado." Mizuki and the hooded man turned their heads in unison, and they both saw, to Mizuki's horror, an angry Naruto holding the scroll while his Kaigen was activated. "No. That can't be. I killed you. I killed you." Mizuki shouted out in pure anger but in surprise as well. He had killed the demon, he was sure of it, but if he did kill him, then why was he holding the scroll? The hooded man looked at the boy and let a faint grin form on his face. Those eyes, the figure thought before he turned his head towards Mizuki. "Go through the portal quickly. I will follow shortly with the scroll." Mizuki nodded and leapt into the portal and swiftly disappeared, much to Naruto's anger. "You bastard. Why did you do that?" Naruto shouted as the figure looked up at the blonde-haired boy. "He's Orochimaru-sensei's subordinate, what does it matter to you anyways?" Naruto growled as he sat the scroll down, then said, "Because he was my kill. Kage Bushin no Jutsu." 50 Naruto suddenly appeared, then Naruto ordered them to attack. The Bushins attacked fiercely, and with their Kaigen activated, they were a lot faster, but before they even made it to the hooded figure, they were met by crimson and black lighting that reduced them to ashes. "Try again," the figure murmured with a smirk. Naruto scowled before he jumped down at the man and aimed a near-eyed at the figure's head, only for his scowl to deepen when he missed. Naruto landed on the ground and began to sloppily attack his opponent, who dodged his moves flawlessly, which frustrated Naruto to no end. Even with the speed of his Kaigen, the figure was swiftly dodging everything he threw at him. The hooded figure ducked Naruto's right hook and nearly ran into Naruto's left hand, but dodged at the last second before spinning around to Naruto's back as if he was dancing and side-kicked Naruto in his back, sending the boy flying stomach first into a tree branch. Naruto fell on the ground and bounced up before he made 10 clones, and together, the 8 of them charged at the figure, only for 4 of them to be destroyed by crimson and black lightning. Naruto and his remaining clones began to rain down blow after blow at the figure, only for him to dodge every hit once more, then with a flash of crimson and black lighting, crimson katana appeared in his hand, and without any warning, 4 of Naruto's clones were dispelled instantly when the sword slashed through their waists in a circle, but luckily, Naruto leapt over the figure's crimson katana and backflipped a few times, then landed on one knee after making a few seals and shouting Bushin Bakuha. The 2 remaining clones that were near the man glowed brightly before they exploded right in front of the hooded figure. Naruto panted slightly before he grinned, which was quickly wiped off his face, only to chance into a look of pure horror as he saw the hooded figure standing there as if he wasn't even touched by the explosions. He watched as the figure lifted up his right hand and opened it. Naruto then felt an unknown force throw him into a tree, and then before Naruto knew it, the figure appeared in front of him and punched him hard in the stomach. Naruto doubled over in pain before the figure removed his fist from Naruto's stomach, letting the Uzumaki fall off onto the ground, face first. Naruto opened one of his eyes only to see the figure standing in front of him. Impressive, the figure said as he then turned around and walked to his portal, which was still there. "Why won't you kill me?" Naruto asked as he struggled to lift his head to see his victorious opponent, his eyes trying to keep focus on the hooded man before him, but his eyes continued to waver. The hooded man looked down at the beaten newly made shinobi and simply chuckled, telling the boy in an ominous but nonchalant manner, "Because I see the potential inside of you to become a great challenge in the future." The man then turned around and walked further into the portal he had created, but then he paused and twisted his head and asked the blonde, "Tell me, what is your name?" "You Uzumaki Naruto." The man stayed silent for a moment before another chuckle left his lips, but this one was more darker than the last one, and with an oddly smooth and dark voice, the man said, "Interesting, you will be seeing me much more in your future, Uzumaki Naruto, but seeing as I now know you named, you must know mine. I am simply known as Kuroi." As Naruto's consciousness began to fade away, the blonde boy managed to catch the man's final words, just as everything went black. "Grow strong, Uzumaki." A few minutes earlier, Yamanaka Inoichi was jumping from tree to tree as they searched for the missing forbidden scroll and Uzumaki Naruto. He, along with his 2 friends, fellow Junins Akimichi Chimza and Nara Shikaku, were looking for Naruto and the forbidden scroll until they heard a huge explosion near the forest. Thinking the same thing as his shadow user friend, the 3 of them rushed into the forest until they came by Iruka's body. Iruka Chimza murmured softly while kneeling down next to the body of the fallen shinobi. He plucked a large shuriken from Iruka's neck, then moved his hand to the Chunin's face and closed his eyes before saying, "Chimjai once told me that Iruka adores the boy, and from what he also told me, Naruto feels the same way about Iruka. Naruto may have stolen the scroll, but he couldn't have done this, he couldn't have killed Iruka, not like this. This makes no sense," Inoichi told them, crossing his arms while his face scrunched up in thought until Shikaku suddenly asked Chimza, "How much does that shuriken weight?" Chimza stared at his friend but shrugged and lifting it up and down before saying, "A good 30 pounds. It was too much for any child bearer of the Kikbi or not. Inoichi, can just anyone get a weapon like that?" Inoichi shook his head no, but he was still a little confused at why his friend was asking these questions. "No, only Chunin and over can buy shinobi weapons like this shuriken, and with one of this size and weight, Naruto would need to be very strong to hold it, let alone throw it. Do any of you think a mere kid can steal a large shuriken like that without tripping any of the alarms?" Both Inoichi and Chimza shook their heads at this question, but then both of them started to put the pieces together. Shikaku stood up and looked to the sky and told them, Shikamaru told me that Naruto was the only student to fail the genin exams today, and now he's involved with stealing the scroll, and Iruka's dead with a 30-pound shuriken that Chunin and up can carry. You both know what I am implying, right? There's something more sinister is at work here," Chimza told them with a cold look on his face. If there was anything he hated more than anything was a traitor to their village. "We must find Naruto quickly if that's the case. If someone was willing to kill Iruka, they will have no problems killing the prison of the Kikbi," Inoichi told his comrades with a nod, agreeing with the implication. The 3 shared a silent prayer until Shikaku suggested that he and Chimza should bring Iruka's body to the morgue. Inoichi agreed and he watched the 2 take the Chunin's body and disappear through the forest. Inoichi sighed before he continued on his way until another explosion shook the area. "I must be getting closer," he said before he ran faster through the area until he spotted Naruto on the ground and the hooded figure walking into his portal before closing quickly. Knowing there was no chance for him to catch that figure now, Inoichi instead ran out into the opening and towards the unconscious Naruto and felt his pulse. Inoichi sighed a sigh of relief, realizing Naruto was only unconscious. He had finished one of his objectives, but now he needed to find the forbidden scroll, which he soon did when he looked into the tree right behind him. Inoichi grinned and picked up the unconscious boy before walking up the tree and grabbing the scroll. Now Inoichi had another problem. Where was he going to put Naruto while he delivered the scroll back to the Hokage? He could just take Naruto with him, but this kid was heavy and he really didn't feel like carrying him all the way there. He then noticed the street he was on and grinned. He knew just the place to take him. 10 minutes later. Maybe I should have taken him to the bar instead, Inoichi said with a sigh as he heard his daughter and his wife in the middle of another, at least to him, pointless argument outside of his home. With another sigh, Inoichi braced himself for the barrage of questions he knew he was going to get before knocking on his purple door. He then heard his wife tell Ino to open the door. He then heard more yelling, then finally his daughter opened the door only to gasp in shock at the person in his arms. "Otu-san, what's Naruto doing here?" she asked her father as he carried the unconscious Uzumaki into their home. The Yamanaka home wasn't as huge as the Nara or the Akimichi clan home, but Inoichi loved his small home, despite its walls being purple and pink. Inoichi sat Naruto on his longer couch and asked his wife to grab him a few blankets as he sat the large scroll down next to him on the ground. She nodded and hurried off to grab what her husband had asked for as Ino looked on, confused as ever. His wife returned a few minutes and handed him 2 blankets which Inoichi used to cover the sleeping Uzumaki. Inoichi patted Naruto's head and turned around only to meet Ino's glare. "What is he doing here, Otu-san?" Ino asked again as her father scratched the back of his neck, a nervous grin etched on his face, before he replied, Naruto was injured and I brought him here until he wakes up." Ino looked at Naruto's unconscious form and then back at her father, a frown forming on her face. "The Baku got in trouble doing one of his mindless pranks again, didn't he?" she asked with a sneer towards her unconscious blonde counterpart. In reality, Ino thought his mindless pranks were funny and very elaborate for someone who she personally thought was an Baka, but even the Baka didn't deserve whatever the hell happened to him just because of a prank. "No, it's a lot worse than that, but I cannot tell you anything other than that," Inoichi said with a grim look on his face, surprising his daughter greatly. She's never seen that look on her father before and it worried her greatly. "Yukina, please watch over Naruto for me, I must report to the Hokage," Inoichi said as Yukina nodded and gave him a quick peck on the lips and a hurry back before he rushed out of the door. Yukina smiled slightly before she turned her head to Ino and asked her to watch Naruto so she could get dinner started. Ino hated the idea and yelled out her dislike for the idea, only to find herself watching the blonde 5 minutes later, much to her disdain. "Well, isn't this just super? I cannot believe Otu-san decided I was suitable to watch the Baka," an annoyed Ino muttered to herself as she sat on the love seat in her living room, currently reading her favorite magazine, and went to turn a page until she heard Naruto groaning in pain. Leaning over Naruto, Ino saw that he was sweating profusely, which caused her to call her mother, who was currently still cooking, into the living room to see her daughter Ino panicking as she tried to shake Naruto awake to no avail. "Mom, what's wrong with him?" Ino asked her, worrying for her annoying blonde counterpart. Yuki looked at the small teen pain contorted face and felt herself actually worrying as well for the Uzumaki. "I don't know, little one, but he'll be okay. I assure you." Ino tore her eyes from her mother's face slowly to look towards Naruto's sleeping face and felt herself hoping he was okay. After all, she may have not liked him, but she didn't want to see him hurt. "Just keep watching him, Ino-chan, and make sure he's okay," her mother advised her before waltzing back into the kitchen, leaving Ino alone with the sleeping boy once more. After a few minutes passed, Ino leaned her head over his to flip the cloth on the other side again, only to hear him groan out again. "Had better soon, Baka." Naruto's dream. Naruto was running. He could feel the dark presence inches behind him, trying to take his orange jacket into its grasp, but Naruto was quicker than this threat, but as he continued to run, all he could see by his side was Iruka's mangled corpse. The Chunin's dead pale blue eyes narrowed at the fleeing Uzumaki with so much anger that Naruto was able to feel its intense heat and with each step he took. Iruka's voice yelled murder. His voice echoing and vibrating down the dark, blood-covered alleyway. But hearing his sensei calling him a murder repeatedly in that haunting tone had caused him to slow down until he stopped and fell to his knees, only to see the larger version of Iruka's head in front of him, cold dead blue eyes gazing at him with the utmost disgust. "You did this to me." Naruto looked up at his sensei's head and shook his head in terror, shouting, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, sensei." "But you did," the head told him, sneering down at the boy's kneeling, hunched over form. "You stole the forbidden scroll, you lured me there to take it back, you let Mizuki kill me, and you let him escape." Naruto looked down at the ground beneath him with blurred eyes due to his unshed tears, but that's when he heard its slow and ragged breathing hitting the back of his neck. Naruto could feel the dark presence behind him, but when he turned his head around, he slowly raised his head to face the figure and saw two glowing red eyes narrowing themselves at the sight of the blonde boy. Then without warning, the figure grabbed Naruto's neck and pulled the boy from the ground and into the air. Naruto pounded against the figure's forearm with terror, but he soon found himself getting weaker until those hard punches became soft, akin to a kitten pawing at a dangling scarf. "Finish it," he heard his sensei utter with scorn, and with a nod from the figure, Naruto heard a distinctive crack coming from within him, then everything instantly went black. Remand. It had been 10 minutes since then, and Ino figured she should do as she said. She sat on the couch where Naruto was laying and watched his face contort in pain, and she felt herself caressing his right cheek before she mentally yelled at herself to stop it, before she noticed Naruto's face going back into the peaceful state it was in, and smiled before grabbing the damp towel and flipping the cloth on the cooler side and laid it back on Naruto's forehead, but when she had leaned over his head, she was met with his panicked but confused blue eyes, which had captivated the girl. She had never seen such a fierce blue before in her lifetime, even with her own platinum blue eyes, but staring into his eyes made her think of the ocean her father and mother had taken her to when she was younger and felt herself wanting to stare at these endless pools of blue until she heard him ask, "Ino, what are you doing?" Ino forced the oncoming blush down and frowned down at him before raising her head and crossing her arms. "I was waiting for you to wake up, Baka," she said while Naruto leaned himself in an upright position with a frown once Ino had moved out of his way. "Where am I?" Naruto asked her, those same blue eyes gazing shining with confusion in them. Ino stood up and fixed her clothing so she would look neat and presentable, then replied sarcastically as possible, "I don't know, Whiskers, my house perhaps." Naruto stared at her in shock. She hadn't called him Whiskers since they were little, but he knew that it still annoyed him just as much as it did back then, especially now that he found out he was the holder of the Kikbi no Kitsune, which may be the reason he had said Whiskers. "So how did I get here?" Ino groaned. How idiotic was he? "My dad brought you here because you were hurt," Ino answered before sitting herself down on the chair and crossing her legs, staring at her fellow blonde. "So, what happened to you? Another prank gone wrong or something stupid like that?" Ino asked him, but she didn't expect a few tears to escape his eyes. Ino didn't get a chance to finish because Naruto began to cry, his shoulders began to shake as his tears rained down from his eyes onto his cheek. Ino didn't know what to do as she watched her normally annoying acquaintance cry in front of her, but deep inside, she knew it wasn't right, so without wasting a moment, she hugged him close while his tears fell onto her shirt. "Hokage's tower. That's how I found him," Hokage-sama, Inoichi said as the Sandame's frown deepened. Inoichi had reported to him that not only did he find Iruka dead and Naruto injured and unconscious, but Inoichi saw a man walking through a portal of some kind, and that worried him greatly. Anyone who had the power of entering the village with such ease would be a problem in the near future, but until then, he had to worry about his surrogate grandson's mental and physical health. "Where is Naruto now, Inoichi-san?" The Sandame asked as he took a puff out of his pipe. "He is currently resting at my home for the night." Hokage-sama, the Sandame, knew he had to speak to Naruto about everything that had befallen him on this night, but until that time, he would let Naruto rest at Inoichi's home. No sense in waking the poor boy yet to give him a rather stressful talk. Not only for Naruto but for himself as well, so the Sandame nodded in acceptance, then thanked the Junin before dismissing him. The old Hokage soon stood up and walked onto his balcony and took a slow, deep breath of the crisp air of the night, enjoying the sight of the many stars that sat around the silvery moon, thinking, "Tomorrow will be quite bothersome, I can feel it." Konoha morning. The golden sun had just risen over the village of Konoha, and everyone had awakened to greet it, except two blonde teens who were currently resting on a hideous purple couch. One was sitting back onto the comfy couch while the other laid peacefully on the lap of the girl with a magazine over his face. Two iris-less platinum blue eyes slowly opened as a beam of light hit her face. She shook her head lightly to shake the cobwebs out of her head before she felt a light pressure on her lap. She looked down slowly and saw who was causing the pressure on her lap. She felt her mind slowly warp into a mild confusion. The first thought that had appeared in her mind when she saw the sleeping boy on her lap was to beat him into submission, but then her mind reminded her of what had happened the night before and suddenly felt worry wash over her. She could remember every tear that fell from his eyes, and it worried her greatly. What could have happened last night to make him upset? She watched his face shift from comfort to sadness before it fell back to comfort. He then did something that Ino wasn't certainly prepared for. He smiled and snuggled deeper into her lap, a huge blush formed on her face, and it got even worse when he pulled his face closer to her stomach and private area. The blush deepened before an angry tick appeared on her head. Village of Konoha. Nara Shikamaru breathed out a troublesome as he walked towards the academy, along with his good friend Akimichi Choji. They were discussing about the whereabouts of their third friend, Yamanaka Ino, until they heard a loud voice scream, "Pervert." followed by a resounding slap which was so loud, all the birds that were sitting on the tree suddenly flew off the trees in a hurry. That answers our question how troublesome Shikamaru sighed out before he and his friend continued their walk towards the academy. They knew the academy wouldn't be open for another 2 hours, but it was the one place Shikamaru could sleep without fear of his mother, waking him up with her frying pan like his poor father. Yamanaka household. Ouch. Damn it, Ino, what was that for? Naruto screamed out as he held his now glowing right cheek as he stared at the still crimson blonde who sat on the couch, putting her folded hands over her lap, looking down. Baka, she whispered before she stared at him fiercely. You shouldn't have pulled your face closer to that area. Ino continued to look down at her lap, not noticing Naruto's blushing face. Well, you couldn't have told me that instead of slapping me to another galaxy? Naruto asked but then sighed when he realized that he wouldn't get an answer. A few seconds later, Naruto found himself in front of two mildly amused but angered Yamanakas. He tried to explain what happened through stuttering and nearly lost his cool until Ino herself helped him, sparing him the parental beatdown. After eating some breakfast made by Yuki Yamanaka, Inoichi took Naruto aside while his wife started the dishes. Naruto, the Hokage asked me to tell you to meet him at that place. He said you would know where. Inoichi said as Naruto nodded. After staying there for another few minutes to make himself as presentable as possible. Naruto gave a bow and thanked the two elder Yamanaka for letting him stay there for the night and taking care of him and asked them with a sincere tone to tell Ino that he was sorry for what he had done, but the two laughed at this good-naturedly and promised Naruto they would tell their daughter that before bidding him goodbye. Naruto smiled and gave them a bow before bidding them a goodbye also and leaving their home to meet the Hokage, not knowing he had a follower with blonde hair and platinum blue eyes. Hokage Monument. The Sandaime sighed softly as he gazed at the blue sky. He found himself always doing this if he was troubled or when he needed to calm down from a very taxing council meeting. He often compared himself to Nara Shikaku and his son Nara Shikamaru. Before he could think on it more, he suddenly felt a familiar presence and smiled gently. The Hona looks nice today, doesn't it, Naruto-kun? His old but powerful voice said as Naruto smiled and walked until he stood right next to his second precious person in the entire village. It does, Jai-san, Naruto replied as the two gazed out into the village, a gentle wind blowing across the area, giving the effect of peace that the two were currently feeling. Inoichi-san said you wanted to meet me here. What about Jai-san? Naruto asked as the Sandaime looked over at the young blonde-haired boy and nodded his head. I wish to talk to you about the events of last night, the Sandaime answered before noticing the pain on Naruto's face. Naruto nodded and proceeded to tell Sarutobi everything that had happened, even about his Kaigan and his mother, while the look of sadness was still on his face. Sarutobi clenched his jaw as Naruto wrapped up the story and hugged the boy when he noticed tears falling out of his eyes. Ino felt herself tearing up as well as her mind went over what she had just heard. She wanted to leave, but found herself still in the spot she was rooted in and continued to watch the scene. It's all my fault. If only I knew what would happen, I would have never stolen the scroll. Naruto cried as he held on to his grandfather, the tears he thought that ran out last night getting on the Hokage's robe, efficiently wetting it. Sadness was evident in the Sandaime face as he consoled the child he loved as if he was his own grandson. He did not want to see who he dubbed as the sunshine of Konoha in tears like this. Naruto-kun, Iruka gave his life for you because he cared deeply for you. I know it hurts right now, but believe me Naruto, this pain will pass with time, the Sandaime said with his soothing grandfatherly voice, which made Naruto's tears slowly stop, but Naruto shook his head, saying I doubt it, remembering that disturbing dream he had during his time with the Yamanaka family. It's not fair, Naruto complained weakly. Why did he have to die? Why couldn't I instead? He had so much to live for, no one would miss me, Naruto asked as he pulled his head from out of the Sandaime's robe and looked at the elder, a look of pure loss in the child's eyes which made the Sandaime nearly come to tears himself, but he held them in check. Naruto. Iruka gave his life because he cared about you much more than his own life. If you would have died, he would be in the same state you are in now, maybe even worse, he said softly as he watched Naruto look down at the ground, his face still holding the look of pure sadness. Do you think Iruka-sensei is happy up there for saving me? Naruto asked while he wiped the remaining tears off of his face. The Sandaime nodded in response and smiled when he saw that Naruto had a small smile on his face. Then out of the clear blue, Naruto's face suddenly took a serious turn while he looked at the Sandaime, making the older man nervous. Why didn't you tell me about the Kikbi being sealed inside of me or about my ninjutsu or about my Aka-san? Tell me why, Jai-san? Naruto asked. The Sandaime bit back a sigh as he stared at the clouds in the sky before he answered because it wasn't your time to know yet, Naruto. Naruto looked at him with a confused look before the Sandaime continued. You weren't supposed to find out about the Kikbi until you were 18 or when you reached the rank of Chunin. Naruto looked at the man everyone called the professor and frowned deeply, a hurt look on his face. He thought his Jai-san could trust him with everything, and it hurt Naruto deeply to know that his Jai-san kept stuff he was supposed to know a secret. Sandaime caught Naruto's look of hurt and sighed gently to himself. It wasn't because I wanted it to keep it from you, Naruto. It's just the opposite, it's just that I was thinking about your safety. Many people were after your mother and your Taijutsu and I couldn't risk that, Naruto. It's the same with the Kikbi. Many people wanted to hurt you because they thought you were the Kikbi, and they are wrong, Naruto. You aren't the Kikbi. Just its container. Do you understand me? Sandaime asked while Naruto looked down at the ground and asked him. Do I have a father out there? If the Sandaime wasn't nervous before, he was now. He couldn't tell Naruto who his father was yet, or else he would be subjecting his grandson to more danger. You have a father, Naruto. I wish I could tell you who is, but I cannot. Naruto looked at his elder with anger in his eyes. First you keep Kikbi and my ninjutsu a secret from me, and now this Jai-san. Do you honestly think I'm going to blab about who my father is or something? Naruto asked him, the hurt look on his face returning. Because you are not ready for it, Naruto. You're not ready for all of his enemies you'll have to face. You're not ready for all the questions you will face, knowing you won't get the answers to them. The Sandaime said with fury behind his eyes. Before he saw Naruto flinch under his gaze. His gaze soon softened as he said, when the time comes, Naruto, I will tell you everything about him. Everything. Do you understand? Naruto nodded and hoped that he would keep his word as his trust in the old man waned a bit. After a few minutes of silence, the Hokage said, Naruto, there is another reason I called you here. Naruto looked up at his face, his eyes still holding distrust in them, as he watched his grandfather take something, a dark blue bundle of cloth, out of his robe and put it in Naruto's hands. Naruto tilted his head in confusion, and with an encouraging nod from the elder shinobi, Naruto unraveled it and gasped in shock. In Iruka's will, he stated that if he somehow died and you were a shinobi of Konoha, he requested to having me personally hand you his headband to remember him by, the Sandaime said, while Naruto traced his finger over the metal plate in the middle of the dark blue cloth. But I'm not a shinobi, Naruto said with a frown before he heard the shinobi next to him chuckle. For recovering and protecting the forbidden scroll from the traitor, Mizuki, here is in Sarutobi, Urbi decree that you, Naruto Uzumaki, are now an official genin of Konohagakure, no Sato, the Sandaime said, as he looked at Nugenin's shocked face. Why, you mean I'm a shinobi? Naruto asked, hardly believing the words coming out of his words. The Sandaime's laughter and smile answered for him. Naruto suddenly jumped in the air and screamed as loudly as he could. I did it, Iruka-sensei. Naruto cheered as into the morning sky as the Sandaime chuckled at the boy's happiness. Ino watched as Naruto cheered and she smiled before her mind wandered back to what he told the Hokage and felt worried Naruto couldn't be the Kikbi. A demon cannot show emotions, can they? Ino questioned herself before she left the two alone, a million questions in her head. Hopefully her parents could help her sort everything out about this, she hoped they could. She really did. But little did she know, the Sandaime's eyes had turned to the area she was just standing in. Ino walked inside her house with a blank expression on her face. Even after the long walk back, her mind was still on finding out Naruto's secret or the Kikbi's secret. She was just confused. She then walked past the kitchen only to see her mother and father speaking to each other. Ino walked inside of her house and into the living, then decided to sit down in between her mother and father and gave a deep confused sigh. Her parents stopped talking and looked at their daughter as if to say, what do you need, child? Ino cleared her throat and told her parents what she heard during Naruto and the Hokage's talk. When she was finished, her mother and father had a look of clear disbelief. After a few moments of silence, Inoichi stood up and kneeled in front of his daughter and asked, how did the Hokage not sense you there? Ino shrugged and simply replied, I don't know, but I kinda wish she did. Inoichi gave a soft sigh before he looked at her platinum blue eyes and asked, tell me, Ino, do you believe that Naruto is the Kikbi? Ino looked into her father's eyes and opened her mouth to give him the answer, but closed it again. Did she think Naruto was a demon? From all the stories she heard about demons, they were depicted as an evil, moralist, lying, selfish and very ugly group of beings, but Naruto was kind, caring, selfless, and even though she wouldn't admit this to anyone, but she thought he was cute, but could it all be a lie? Could Naruto really be one of those beings in disguise? I don't know, Ino said, a sad sigh escaping her lips. I feel so lost. Her mother and father locked eyes for a quick second and with a nod from her husband, Yuki walked out of the room, leaving the two shinobi alone. Inoichi stood up from his chair and motioned for her to follow him into the kitchen, where he took out a kunai and a scroll and sat them upon the table before asking, okay Ino. What are these items? Ino rolled her eyes with a reply of it's a sealing scroll and a kunai. What does this have to do with Naruto being a demon or not? Inoichi merely smiled. It has everything to do with Naruto and whether or not he is a demon. He replied before sealing the kunai into the scroll. Now Ino, what is this? Inoichi asked as Ino felt anger slowly build in her blood. It's a scroll, O2-san. What does this have to do? Why she didn't get a chance to finish because her father lifted up his right hand as if to tell her to shut up and let me continue, making Ino roll her eyes and obey her father, but with a small smirk on his face. Ino watched as scroll was suddenly thrown in her face, sending her sprawling backwards out of chair and smack dab in the middle of the empty door frame that connected the kitchen and living room together. Ino shook her head and winced from the pain of the scroll that had hit her forehead, then gave her father a harsh glare. "Why did you hit me with the scroll?" Ino exclaimed in anger while her father looked at her with an innocent look on his face. "Scroll? I hit you with a kunai, not a scroll. Maybe you should get some glasses, sweetheart," Inoichi said before ducking the scroll he had just thrown at his daughter moments ago. "I don't need glasses, Otu-san," she told him with a look of indignation. "Just because the kunai is sealed within a scroll doesn't mean that the scroll is a kunai," Ino said before a look of realization formed on her face. Inoichi smiled as he nodded at her, not even bothering to hide the pride he felt at his little girl at how fast she had caught on. "Do you get what I'm trying to say now, Haim?" her father asked her gently. "Naruto is like the scroll and the Kikbi is like the kunai. Even though one is sealed inside the other, they aren't the same thing," Ino summarized with a tiny smile, her confusion now gone. Yuki, who had heard the whole thing as she returned to the kitchen, smiled and nodded in approval at her daughter realizing the truth. Ino slowly rose to her feet, only to suddenly leap up and hug Inoichi, while whispering to him, "Thank you, Otu-san." Inoichi nodded and hugged her back before pulling her away with a serious look on his face. "I'm glad I could help, Ino, but there is something else you must know. The truth about Naruto and Kikbi is an S-rank secret. If you tell anyone about this, you could be sentenced to death. Do you understand the seriousness of this secret?" he asked as Ino looked at her father in shock. If she told anyone about Naruto's secret, she would be put to death. She never knew a secret that was punishable by death, but apparently, she was learning a lot today. Ino then swore in her mind and to her father that she would never tell anyone about the true relationship between Naruto and the Kikbi, before smiling at her mother and father, before giving each of them a peck on the cheek, telling them, "I'm going to go talk to Naruto. I'll be back later." She then ran out of the kitchen and left her house to search for Naruto. Inoichi then stood up and turned his head to the corner and asked, "Was that satisfying enough for you, Hokage-sama?" A light chuckle was heard before the Sandame stepped out of the shadows with a smile on his face. "It was. Thank you for talking to your daughter about this, Inoichi-san," the old Hokage said as Inoichi thought it was either I tell her or it would have meant her death by your hands with a bitter tone. Yuki bowed towards the Hokage and asked, "Hokage-sama, would you really have had to kill her if she told anyone else other than us?" The Hokage with a frown nodded his head once and walked towards the female Yamanaka and said, "What she did today was very treasonous to our village, Yamanaka-san. Had I not been busy with trying to help Naruto-kun, she could have very well have been terminated by my hand, but I am truly glad that wasn't the case." Yuki hid her gasp of shock as did her husband. Was the Hokage that hell-bent to keep Naruto's secret that he would kill a small child? The Hokage nodded his head and bid the two goodbye before he grabbed a kunai and stabbed himself. The two Yamanakas stood in shock before sighing in relief as the Hokage disappeared in a plume of smoke. Ino began searching everywhere for Naruto. She knew he wasn't on top of the Hokage monument because she had checked there first, only to see him gone. She was currently at Ichikaru's ramen shop, asking the head ramen chef, Tucci, and his daughter Ayam about if they had seen them. They told her they haven't seen him at all that day. Ino thanked the two and walked out of Ichikaru's and sighed to herself before heading out to search for him, not knowing that had she stayed for another 10 minutes, Naruto would be entering the ramen shop with a huge smile on his face. She had searched everywhere imaginable to find the other blonde until the sky darkened and shined with millions of stars in the sky. Ino knew she wouldn't find him now, so she simply sighed and returned to her home, a dejected look on her face. She ignored her mother and father and went straight to her room, locked the door, changed into her pajamas and laid in the bed, hoping she would be able to talk to him tomorrow at the academy. "Naruto, you better be at the academy or I swear I'll kick your ass." The next day, Shinobi Academy. "Where is that baka?" Ino asked her one of her best friends, Nara Shikamaru, as she tapped her foot on the ground impatiently. There's only a few minutes left for class to begin and Naruto hadn't showed up yet. It was honestly pissing her off to extreme levels. "Which baka are we referring to?" Shikamaru drawled out slowly, his eyes remaining closed. Naruto was her response. "How should I know? I'm not his mother, am I?" Shikamaru asked with a frown on his face before Ino had hit him upside the head for the comment which deepened his frown. Chimjai chuckled while he ate his chips at his friend's antics. "Troublesome. Why are you so worried about Naruto anyways? He's a big boy. He can watch after himself." Shikamaru drawled out only to scowl when he was hit again. "I know that, but it is something of importance," Ino said before she felt someone watching her. "You've been looking for Uzumaki-san. Is something wrong?" a calm voice asked with a hint of interest. Yes Shino, I haven't been able to find him since he stayed over yesterday. Ino covered her mouth, accidentally letting that last part slip out. Shikamaru and Shinji looked at her in shock. She felt her face heat up as she heard one of her friends laughing at her. Man, Akamaru, who knew Ino and Naruto were like that? Kiba Inuzuka asked as a small puppy arfed in response. Kiba grinned and laughed louder, only to be quieted by a glare from Ino. It's not like that. Ino yelled as Kiba laughed some more. He was hurt yesterday night and dad brought him over so he could heal, Ino said before his laughter stopped. Naruto was hurt last night. What happened? Kiba asked as a hint of worry was in his voice. Despite the fights they get into, he and Naruto were friends and he looked after the blonde-haired kid since they were kids, along with Shinji and Shikamaru, who had equally worried looks on their faces. Ino sighed and told them that it was Naruto's right to tell them, not hers. The three looked at her in shock. Ino never kept a secret and when she was told one, she was the one gossiping around the entire town about it, but for her to keep what happened to Naruto a secret, it had them scared and worried. Before Shikamaru could ask a question that would have gotten him slapped by the blonde Yamanaka, the door opened and a man in his mid-50s with long black hair, a long black robe, pearl-like eyes and a weird green seal on his head, walked inside and held the door open. The kid sighed as they watched a girl walk inside gracefully with midnight blue hair, cold lavender pearl-like eyes, black pants, blue sandals, and an open white jacket with a black skin-tight shirt on under it. She looked over at the man holding the door and said, "You're dismissed, Ko-san." The man gave a deep bow before whispering yes, Hinata-sama, and leaving the room, closing the door behind him. Hinata sat down at her seat, refusing to look at anyone except the Black Horde. "Hey Hinata, why are you so late today?" Kiba asked, trying to strike up a conversation only to receive silence in return. "So, where have you been? It's been so long since we hung out with each other," Kiba said. Still silence. Ino shook her head as she watched Kiba continue to try and fail to get the Hyuga to talk. Finally when Kiba was about to open his mouth, a cold voice calmly said, "Please refrain from speaking to me Inuzuka-san or I will be forced to incapacitate you." Kiba then backed away and sat in between Ino and Shikamaru, knowing all too well that Hinata will back up what she said. After a few minutes, much to Ino's delight, Uchiha Sasuke walked into the room and much to Ino's despair, her ex-best friend Haruno Sakura was behind him step by step, pestering him for a date only to receive silence in return. Ino felt a smile wash over her face as she watched her crush sit down a level below them. Thinking quickly, she wrapped her arms around him and whispered in his ear that she had missed him, making Sakura angry in the process. The three boys sighed helplessly as a fight blew out over the last Uchiha, and they sat on the sidelines and watched as screaming match grew louder until a fight broke out. The fight grew so large that Kiba, Shikamaru, and Shinji and to their unified surprise and relief, Shino, had to pull the two girls apart. Shikamaru and Shinji held Ino back while Kiba and Shino held Sakura back. When the two calmed down, they sat beside Sasuke, putting him in between the two girls pining for his affection. After waiting 30 more minutes, Naruto finally walked into the room with a sad smile on his face. He was glad class hadn't started yet because he really needed the rest after staying up all night, still upset after everything he had been through. After waiting 30 more minutes, Naruto finally walked into the room with a sad smile on his face. He was glad class hadn't started yet because he really needed the rest after staying up all night, still troubled about the Sandame's lack of trust. Kiba grinned, noticing Naruto's hide-on tied around his arm and decided to tease his blonde-haired friend. "Hey, aren't real shinobi supposed to be in here?" Kiba asked as Naruto looked up at him. With fire in his eyes, Naruto shouted back at him, "Don't you have glasses, dog breath?" "The Hokage himself gave me this," Naruto said as he pointed at his hide with a smile on his face. "Troublesome. He's just kidding around," Naruto Shikamaru said while he looked at Kiba with a gaze that said, "Just shut up and leave it alone." Kiba rolled his eyes and frowned at the lazy shinobi and said, "I'm just having fun with him Shikamaru. He knows I'm kidding around," Kiba said with smile before walking down and meeting Naruto with a high five. "Ino said you were hurt last night, you feeling better?" Kiba asked with a hint of concern in his eyes. Naruto nodded and patted Kiba's shoulder as he thought maybe I should speak Ino later on. Kiba smirked and shrugged his head at Ino's direction with a grin. Naruto tilted his head to the side only to see Ino glaring at Sakura while clutching Sasuke's left arm. Naruto then heard Kiba talking to him while he stared at Ino. "She's been waiting for you all morning." Well before Sasuke waltzed into the room like he owned the place. Kiba finished speaking before punching Naruto softly in the arm. Naruto without even thinking, punched Kiba back with the same force Kiba had punched him with. While the two began to clown around, Naruto felt someone staring at him while his back was turned and immediately turned around, only to see Hinata just staring at the blackboard. Naruto told Kiba to pause on their roughhousing for now so he could try and talk to Hinata. Kiba warned Naruto that she seemed to be angry, which was normal for her, but lately, she's been in a mood that was uncharted. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and walked towards Hinata and gave her a foxy smile. "Hey Hinata-chan, what's up?" Naruto asked cheerfully, only for silence in return. Naruto frowned before placing another smile on his face and began a one-sided conversation with her, and just like Kiba, he was met with silence until after 10 minutes of talking. Hinata stared coldly at Naruto and repeated what she had told Kiba earlier on, and for emphasis, she activated her Byakugan to add more menacing features to her threat. Naruto just stared back at her defiantly, a smile playing on his face. Hinata suddenly stood up and walked away from Naruto and sat at another desk, deactivating her Byakugan. Naruto sighed while looking at the Hika with a sad look in his eyes. She used so sweet and caring, but ever since last year, she had changed overnight. She went from kind, caring and sweet to cold, heartless and dark, just like his sworn rival, Uchiha Sasuke. It was jarring to everyone but especially to Naruto, who was her best friend. Naruto had even grown a faint crush on her, but now she acted as if she couldn't stand breathing the same air as him, and it hurt him so much. Naruto gazed at the cold-hearted Hinata once more and slowly turned around, only to bump into the mad face of Yamanaka Ino. "Do you know I looked for you all over town yesterday?" Ino yelled as she poked Naruto hard in the chest, making him squirm slightly. Naruto had no clue Ino had been looking for him since yesterday, and honestly, he didn't know why. He poked her right shoulder before saying, "Why didn't you just check Ichikaru's? I was there all day." Ino scowled and poked him roughly, this time shouting, "I did check there and you weren't there." Naruto frowned and said, "Look, I'm here now, so what do you want?" Naruto asked while noticing Ino's face getting redder with anger. "Don't you dare take that tone with me, Uzumaki Naruto. I should be trying to make Sasuke mine, but I'm here trying to talk to you," Ino said before her angry tone was replaced by a softer tone, which was rare for her. "I'm sorry Naruto, look, can I talk to you after our teams are formated?" Ino asked with a hopeful look in her eyes. Naruto was rather hesitant to say yes since he thought he was going to get a beating after what had happened yesterday morning, but one look into her eyes had him saying okay. Ino gave Naruto a small smile and thanked him before turning around just to see Sakura hugging Sasuke. "Back off, forehead. He's mine," Ino shouted before marching over and pulled her off of Sasuke. Thankfully, before another fight began, another one of their senseis named Aoi Yukimaru walked inside the room and quickly broke the girls apart and sent them into opposite sides of the room. "Hey Aoi-sensei, where's Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei?" Kiba shouted asked, not noticing Naruto and Ino flinch. "I regret to inform you that Iruka-san and Mizuki-san are no longer here with us," Aoi announced to the class with a sad smile, while most of the kids in the room, except Ino and Naruto, looked at him in confusion. "Did they have a mission or something?" Chimjai asked while munching on his chips. "Iruka-san was killed 2 nights ago, and Mizuki departed from this village," Aoi said as he watched the entire class's face turn into confusion and sadness, except Sasuke, Hinata and Shino. Hinata and Shino were stoic, and Sasuke had a scowl on his face. "How did it happen?" Shino's calm voice rang out as he stared at Aoi under his glasses. "I'm sorry Shino-san, but I cannot tell you." Shino as well as Hinata and Shikamaru noticed that his eyes flashed hatefully at Naruto before going back into its calm, impassive look. "Now, the funeral for the two will be held next Saturday at 12:30 in the afternoon. Any questions?" The children stayed quiet and Aoi took that as a no and continued. "Now, let us begin with everyone's new team formation. Team 1 will be Aoi continued to name each of the teams until it came to Team 7. Team 7 will be Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke and Dark Sanada. Your sensei will be Hada Kakashi. Sakura raised her arms in victory while Ino growled in anger. Why did Sakura get to have Sasuke on her team? It's just not fair. The members of Team 8 will be Hika Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba and Aburam Shino. Your sensei will be Iki Kurenai. Kiba slammed his head on his desk hard. Of all the rotten luck he had. He didn't mind being on a team with his best friend Shino, but being stuck with the icy Hika wasn't his idea of fun, but now he had to team with her. How crappy was this? Aoi stared at Kiba and bit back a chuckle before announcing, since Team 9 is still active, we will skip to Team 10. Team 10 will be Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru and Akimichi Chimjai, and your sensei will be Sarutobi Asuma. Ino knew someone was out to get her at that moment. Not only did her rival for Sasuke's love, Haruno Sakura, get him on her team, she was stuck with Chimjai and Shikamaru. They may be her best friends and brothers, but being on their team will be nothing but troublesome as Shikamaru looked around and noticed Aoi didn't call his name and felt a little worried. Hey. What about me? I didn't get a team, Naruto shouted as Aoi looked at him with his hate-filled eyes before covering it up. That's right Uzumaki-san. Due to your unique circumstances, the Hokage asked you to meet him in his office right after we wrap up for the day. Understand? Naruto nodded, content with his answer. After the teams were announced, Aoi began to wrap up everything Iruka had taught them, and by the time he was done, it was already noon. Well class, that's all. Wait in this area until your senseis arrives to pick you up, Aoi said before briskly leaving the room, leaving the newly instated genins along. Sheesh, that guy is nothing like Iruka. If Iruka was here, he would have been a lot nicer to us, Kiba said with a frown as Shino nodded in agreement. Since Aoi left, everyone except Naruto, Hinata, Sasuke and Ino were talking about Iruka's death. Feeling uncomfortable, Naruto told his friends well, catch you guys later before leaving the room, deciding to go to the Hokage's tower to meet his new sensei. Seeing this, Ino told her team that she would be right back and followed Naruto out of the room. Hinata excused herself as well and left after the blonde girl, just needing to leave the room. Naruto Ino. Hey Naruto, wait up. Ino shouted as she watched the orange-wearing blonde walking down the long road from the academy towards town square. Naruto turned around and waited for Ino to catch up to him. Ino stopped in front of the blonde and hunched her upper body over and placed her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. After catching her breath, Ino stood face to face with a whiskered blonde and began to speak before she looked around to make sure they were alone, which they were. Okay, Naruto. I don't know how to say this so I'll just say it. I followed you yesterday after you left my house, Ino said before looking down at the ground before saying in a whisper, I know about the Kikbi. Naruto looked at Ino in shock and backed away from her. Ino saw panic in his eyes as he began to retreat away from her. Naruto, please don't run away. Ino said, the tone in her voice close to begging. Naruto stared at the blonde-haired girl, and despite his fight-or-flight meter was stuck on flight, he decided to stay and hear her out. Ino smiled and thanked him for staying before explaining everything to Naruto. From her thoughts too about Naruto being the demon to her father's unique explanation and her realization. By then end of it, Ino was out of breath and Naruto just stared at her before asking in a small, soft voice Ino had never heard before. So you don't think I'm the Kikbi? Ino shook her head and before she could confirm her answer, Naruto engulfed her in a hug, sweeping her off her feet, repeating the words thank you over and over again. Ino felt her cheeks heat up as Naruto continued to hug her, not knowing that two lavender pearl-like eyes were staring at the two embracing, envy shining inside of them. Naruto sat her down on the ground and smiled at her. The sadness he had felt before was gone and in its place was happiness. At the moment, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Ino smiled back before hearing someone call her name. Ino turned around and saw Shikamaru and Shinji along with a man signaling her to come here. Looks like my sensei showed up, I'll read, Ino said as she turned her attention back at Naruto. I guess I should get going. I'll catch you later, okay? Ino asked as Naruto nodded, his smile never faltering. Yeah. Tell Shikamaru and Shinji I said bye to them too, Naruto whispered while giving Ino one last hug. Ino nodded and returned the hug, then ran off to meet with her new team. Naruto watched a girl running towards her teammates and nodded before realizing he was late to go see the old man. Naruto began to run to make it to the tower in time, still not noticing the eyes that stared at his retreating figure, now narrowed from anger and sadness. Hokage's tower. Naruto walked inside the tower with a huge smile on his face. Despite their rocky friendship, Ino sure as hell became a close friend after this day. The same way Hinata had been a year back. Naruto shook his head, trying to get rid of such thoughts before talking to the secretary who was kind enough to let him inside the Hokage's office. When Naruto walked inside the office, he noticed the Hokage talking with two people. One of the people had on a long tan trench coat and to Naruto's surprised and blushing face, she wore a see-through metal mesh shirt and metal mesh short shorts, but thankfully she wore a tan skirt to cover the top half of her waist, blocking certain areas of her body. Naruto then turned to the other person standing next to her. He was a sickly-looking man who was dressed in more traditional shinobi attire, meaning black suit and green flak jacket and green shinobi sandals, a weird kind of headband that covered the entire top of his head but had the hide in the middle of it. Ah, there you are Naruto-kun, I was wondering when you would get here, the elder Hokage's voice rang out in a grandfatherly manner, snapping Naruto out of his thoughts. You wanted me, Aji-san? Naruto asked hesitantly while looking at him, still on guard. The Sandaime noticed this and sighed, knowing why Naruto did this. Instead, he lifted up both of his hands and moved his hand Ito the left in the woman's direction. Yes, I did. I have two reasons for calling you here. First, I would like to introduce you to Mitarashi Anko. Anko nodded at the kid, a cold expression on her face. The Hokage then moved his right hand and moved it closer to the man. And Gekko Hate. The man began to cough viciously, making Naruto worry about the man's health. These two will both be your sensei from this day forward. Naruto stared at the man in shock. He had two teachers now. He wondered why, but then he quickly answered. From what all the Anbu told me about you Naruto-kun, you're very stealthy and fast on your feet. Anko is one of the best stealth expert I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. She will be helping your stealth and speed. Not one expression passed through Anko's face as she gazed at the blonde boy, and since you one of your Kaigen modes use a katana, I've asked Hei to train you. He is one of the best swordsmen in all of Hai no Kuni. He will be helping you with your speed as well and how to effectively use your bloodline's katana. Hei began coughing again before being able to wheeze out, it'll be a pleasure to teach you. Naruto smiled at the coughing man and then asked if he was alright. The man nodded and before standing at attention. Can you two wait outside for a moment? Naruto will join you two out there when we are done, the Hokage said before the two Takebetsu jounin, while keeping his gaze on Naruto. The two nodded and walked out the room. Well, Hate walked out the room, Anko just sauntered sexily out the room. Naruto watched Anko walk out the room with a blush on his face. He would now nor ever know why she dressed the way she did. There is another reason I called you here today. I've decided to give you something that was originally your mother's. The Sandaime said before seeing Naruto stare at him in shock. Something that was his mother's? He wondered what it was. The Sandaime stood up out of his chair and walked slowly towards a picture of the Shadaime and Nidaime standing together and removed it. Your mother asked me to give this to you once your ninjutsu activated, he said while he unlocked the safe and took something out of it. He turned around and walked towards Naruto with a large blue blanket in his hands. He asked Naruto to remove the blanket. Naruto complied and gasped in surprise. In the Sandaime's arms were two kodaches with an orange spiral at the hilt. Naruto picked up one of the kodaches and marveled at how light it was. He then ran his finger up the blade lightly before putting it back in its sheath. Wow, this is amazing, Naruto said as he grabbed the other kodachi and wondered how he was going to carry them until the Hokage handed him a sling with two sheaths on it. Naruto looked at him in confusion. The Hokage strapped the sling on Naruto's chest and slid the kodaches in their sheaths on Naruto's back. Thanks Aji-san for giving me this, Naruto said. He felt his trust in the old Hokage grow slightly. You are very welcome, Naruto. The Sandaime said with a gently smile on his face. Naruto then walked out of the office to meet with his two senseis, leaving the Hokage alone. When he thought the cost was clear, the Hokage took out a folder and laid it on his desk. He opened the folder and sighed sadly when he saw a picture of a blue-eyed, blonde-haired man smiling, his arm hung around a female with blue eyes and red hair. He then looked lower at the picture and saw a red-haired little girl with blue eyes, smiling along with the other two people in the picture. He looked at the picture and frowned deeply. He knew he had lost a lot of blonde boy's trust when he didn't tell him about his mother, father and Dojutsu, but for sure that Naruto would hate him if he found out that he had a sister. The Sandaime put the picture back in the folder and began to read the contents inside of it, hoping that Naruto would forgive him for keeping this secret. Ugh, where am I? A groggy Naruto asked himself as he forced his body off of the bumpy ground beneath him before his eyes gazed upon the area around him. All he remembered was walking out of the Hokage's office, ecstatic about his mother's weapons before a sharp pain was felt in his neck and moments later, he blacked out only to wake up in this strange forest. With a grunt, Naruto stood upon his 2 feet and looked around. This forest was nothing like the forest he had fought Mizuki in. It looked a lot more mysterious but very dangerous. The entire feeling that was coursing through his veins was that he shouldn't ever be in this forest alone. Hey Gekko, he's finally awake. A cheerful voice shouted out as Naruto looked all around only to see that Mitarashi woman and his other sensei, Gekko Hade. I'm kinda surprised really. No one wakes up that fast after getting hit by him paralysis jutsu. But being the Jinchuriki for the Kikbi no Kitsune must have some perks, Anko finished while staring at the genin, an odd glint in her eyes, making Naruto take a step back nervously, which caused Anko to laugh darkly. Oh yeah, we know about that little beastie hidden within you kiddo, so relax and listen up. This is the setting of your test to see if you can qualify to become a genin, Anko said while Naruto looked at her with suspicion in his eyes. What in the hell was she talking about? He was already a genin. What are you talking about, you insane, kidnapping woman? The Hokage already made me a genin. Naruto shouted out at the woman who began to laugh. I like you kid, a lot of spunk, but it'll take more than that to hurt my little all feelings, Anko said before turning serious. Kid, the academy was to see if you had enough skill to become a genin, this test is to see if you truly earned it or was it really luck that got you through. Anko sighed out before giving the boy a piercing glare, mentally thinking her by Iruka's blood. This test has a 66% fail rate. There may be a lot of genin this year, but only it's very likely that all those kids will be returning to the place they just left. Heiei continued on for her after his coughing fit ended. Naruto suddenly felt his stomach drop as he got what Heiei was saying. If he failed this test, he would return to the academy. He lost the closest thing he saw as a father trying to become a genin, and now that he became one, he couldn't fail now after he lost so damn much. Naruto scowled deeply at that thought and touched his hideite before staring fiercely at his two senseis. Iruka-sensei died because I wanted more than anything to become a genin. Naruto missed a quick look of pain on Anko's face. And now that I am one, I don't care what sick test you guys put me through. I will pass it, no matter what the cost. Not just for my sake, but for Iruka-sensei's as well. Naruto yelled in declaration before pointing at his two teachers. Hayate smirked at his fellow Junin then at the kid before coughing slightly. Good, Naruto. Let's hope you can keep your word. Anko said before closing her eyes, thinking you shouldn't even say his name, murderer. This is the forest of death. There are things in here that will try to kill you. They may be small like a bee or as large as a tiger, maybe even larger. I've also placed different traps inside the entire forest to make things more fun. It varies from poison to explosives. You have 7 days to come out the forest alive, and with this Anko then pulled out a small scroll and handed it to Hayate. Hayate took the scroll and said to Naruto. I will come in one of the 7 days carrying this scroll. I will tell you more once we meet up, understood? Hayate asked before coughing again. Naruto nodded and with that, Hayate formed a few seals and disappeared, leaving leaves falling to the ground, leaving the two alone. Your time begins now Ngaki. Anko threw watch at Naruto who caught it and looked at the watch. Don't slip up or it'll cost you Anko finished before setting her other watch, then making the same seals as Hayate did, she gave him a wink and disappeared as well. This is going to be torture Naruto told himself with a sigh as decided once Anko left to begin setting out. He only had 7 days to do pass this test and Hayate's test as well, so he had to get a head start. He started to run as fast as he could only to step on a tripwire. When the tripwire was pulled, 2 huge spiked logs began to swing down towards the genin at a fast pace. Naruto saw the large logs and quickly rolled out of the way to dodge the logs, only to nearly fall into a pit filled with poisonous snakes. Naruto stood up and jumped over the pit, nearly falling inside of it, but he managed to get himself up on the ground, and seconds after he did, the 2 logs collided where he was standing a few moments earlier. That crazy bitch. Naruto frowned as he said this. She did warn him of all these traps, but he figured they were all on the ground, so that means that he would have to travel by treetop. Naruto climbed up the tree and when he reached the top, he only gasped in shock, then glared in anger. All along the tree branches were shurikens embedded in them, and if that wasn't enough, he saw some odd but faint purple stuff on it which he knew had to be some type of poison. Why did he think that was poison on those embedded shuriken? Because he did not put it past that crazy bitch. Naruto climbed back down towards the ground and when he landed on another tripwire. Naruto then knew as he dodged multiple man-made spears that shot from under the tree's branches that he had a long week ahead of him. Day 2. Naruto sprang up from the river and shouted with joy. After hours of trying with no avail, he had finally caught not 1, but 2 trouts in the river in the forest. He made his way back onto land and grabbed a medjum stick and impaled the 2 trouts with it, then put it over a burning tree that was caught in one of Anko's explosive traps. He hid there and waited for his fish to finish cook, turning it around every few minutes. Naruto had made a lot of progress since he began a day ago. He managed to avoid being burned, skewered, drowned and poisoned, and at one of those traps Anko had set out really was going to do all those things to him had he not made it out. He once followed the straight and narrow path, despite it not understanding or reading the rest of it, he decided to keep going straight because it'll lead him out of this damned place. Naruto's ears perked up when he heard a twig snapping in a bush near his orange jacket. Naruto turned around and pulled out one of his cottages from off of his back and slowly walked to the bush only to laugh when a small bunny rabbit popped out of the bush. What Naruto had failed to notice was the giant fox coming his way and when he did notice, it was already too late. The fox lunged at the blonde and luckily, Naruto was able to block it with his Kodachi, but in the process of blocking it, he fell to the ground while trying to keep the raging fox from trying to maul him. Naruto and the fox growled at each other before Naruto placed both of his feet on the fox's stomach and used all of his strength to push it off of him. The fox flew back and landed on its side before getting back up, baring its fangs at Naruto who was at that point looking down at his black shirt and frowned when he noticed the fox had clawed through it. Luckily, the wound the fox gave Naruto was already healing to his surprise, but the pain remained for a long time before fading away, telling him that he could heal quickly, but the pain from the wound would linger on. Well, that was a good hit, but I'm not finished just yet. Naruto told the fox with a grin as he and the fox circled each other. Naruto pulled out his other Kodachi and twirled them both once, while the fox bared its fangs once more before they lunged at each other. The fight between the human and animal was fierce with Naruto taking multiple deep scratches to his side, shoulder and his inner left thigh, but while he could heal, the fox could not which was slowing down the animal's speed. After keeping up the intense duel for 10 minutes, the wounded fox decided in a last-ditch effort to tackle Naruto, but slid under its lunging form and turned around and stabbed his weapon forward, stabbing the fox straight through its head, instantly ending the battle. Pulling out his weapon, Naruto fell to his knees victoriously, dropping his Kodachi to the ground, only to fall forwards to pant heavily, but as he did this, his eyes caught something moving out of the bush to his far left. It was a small kit. Slowly, Naruto's gaze back at the dead fox in front of him, then back at the kid, and thought, was this its mother? The small kid walked to the fox and nudged it with its head softly, then it got on its two hind legs and touched it with its paws and yipped softly before falling back to the ground. Naruto felt sick to his stomach. He had taken this small kid's parent with his bare hands, and to make it worse, it could have been here to feed its little one, which would have made sense, seeing that Naruto was making some fish, and from the looks of it, the kid was in the area where that bunny had popped out, meaning the fox was trying to defend its child from him, which caused Naruto to feel anger at himself. Because of him, the kid would be all along in this world like he was now all because of him. In this one moment, he had become the traitor Mizuki, and it made him furious. Naruto kneeled in front of the small kid who had stopped laid down next to the dead fox and tried to pet it before pulling his hand back with light scratch marks on it. I guess I deserved that, huh? Naruto asked the animal softly while he waved his right hand, knowing it was already healing. For some mysterious reason, Naruto felt the young kid's feelings, and it felt sad, angry and scared. Angry how this human had killed its mother, sad that its mother was dead, and scared about being alone in this dangerous place. Naruto continued to look at the young kid with sad eyes before he spoke. I'm sorry for what I did to your mother, little one. I cannot lie nor make an excuse. I killed her and you deserve your vengeance, but that doesn't mean you have to be alone. The kid looked at him, the feeling of confusion coming washing over Naruto. I'll take care of you to atone for what I have done to you, and your mother. Naruto spoke before feeling the feelings of fear and nervousness washed over him. When you are bigger, you can gladly take revenge on me for what I have done, but until then, I will not let anything bad happen to you. I promise this on my life, Naruto said with sincerity shining in his voice as the kid tilted his head before Naruto felt a feeling of slight acceptance come over him. Naruto gave the kid a small smile before beginning to make its mother a grave, which took a few hours, but when he finished, he put a large piece of wood over the top of the grave and etched the words fox upon it, promising the kidling that they will come here again to honor the fox. The kid yipped in approval before being picked up by Naruto and beginning their long trek out of the forest. The fish long forgotten. Day 6. Naruto and his new partner spent pretty much the whole 4th and 5th day escaping traps and making their way out of the evil forest Naruto now dubbed it. He looked like he was in a battle with the Kikbi and lost. His black shirt was long gone, leaving his slightly scarred chest bare. His height had multiple ribs and tears in it. He was missing his blue sandals. The left leg of his orange pants were ripped up from the knee down, while his right pants leg had multiple rips and tears in it. His jacket was wrapped around his waist in order to keep the small kid in it, and his kodachi were still strapped on his back. Naruto growled to himself as he walked out in a random opening at a slow pace, checking the area over for any tripwire or anything. After a few minutes of checking, Naruto removed the small kid from out of his jacket and fell to the ground with a thud. He hadn't had a wink of sleep in 2 days now, and it was taking its toll. The kid yelped and stood up on its hind legs and laid its paws on Naruto's head. Naruto could feel the feeling of fear coming off of the kid but was just too tired to comfort it until it bit Naruto's ear. Naruto leaned up and held his ear, a tear in his eyes. Geez Iru, that really hurt. Naruto yelled while he gave the kid he no called Iruka or Iru for short a look of pain. The kid didn't have a name, and Naruto felt that Iruka would be a perfect name for him in honor of his departed sensei, and luckily for him, the kid liked it just as much as he did. Naruto felt Iru becoming sad and quickly tried to cheer the small kid up by petting the little one softly and smiled when he felt the warmth of comfort flow over the fox, but then, he heard a noise in the trees. Naruto instructed Iru to wait in the bushes while he pulled out his kodachis. Geez Naruto, don't you look like hell, a voice wheezed out as Naruto turned around to see one of his new senseis Gekko Hate standing there before beginning to hack and cough loudly, making Naruto start to gag lightly. You should know why I'm here. Hate skeezed out through his coughing as he pulled out his blade and the scroll as well. Naruto watched as he placed the scroll on his belt and said, so my goal is to take the scroll from you, right? Naruto asked, just to go over the requirements to passing Hate's test. Hate shook his head before pointing his sword at Naruto, coughing slightly. Your goal is to not only take the scroll from me, but to draw blood from me as well, by any means necessary. If you can do those 2 things, you pass, but if I draw blood from you and you have the scroll, you will fail. If you drew blood from me but you didn't take the scroll, you fail, and I don't need to say what happens if you don't take the scroll or draw blood. Do you understand those terms? Hayate asked before Naruto nodded without a second thought. Hayate then took out a timer and set it to 60 minutes. You have 1 hour to do both of these things, understood? Hayate asked again before Naruto nodded again. He just hoped Iru didn't come out of those bushes until after all of this is over. Hayate jumped and landed soundlessly on the ground before stepping into a Kenjutsu stance. Naruto smirked as he twirled his kodachis once while he circled his sensei, thinking that this would be easy. All he had to do was strike when his sensei began to cough. Naruto had the plan all worked out until his sensei put his katana down and popped a pill in his mouth. "What is that, sensei?" Naruto asked before Hate suddenly began to hack violently. The shinobi fell on his knees and began to cough more violently before looking up at Naruto. "I'll be fine, Naruto, this is just to make sure my coughing doesn't get in the way of this test." Hate rasped out before continuing to cough. Naruto suddenly felt nervous as Hate's coughing and hacking began to slowly. When Hate stood up, everything about him changed. No longer did he have those bags under his eyes or did he no longer cough. His eyes were like a viper ready to strike without second thought. Naruto suddenly knew this was going to be a lot harder than he expected. Naruto thought he would be able to catch him while he was coughing, but now that Hate took that pill, he looked stronger than ever. Naruto had to decide what he should go for first. Blood or the scroll. Naruto figured that making his sensei draw blood would be easier than capturing the scroll, so he decided to go after the hardest thing first. But before he could spring into action, Hate spoke. "Before we start, I must tell you something," Hate said before Naruto stared at him, ready to attack at any second. "I will not hold back, Naruto, so come at me with the intent to kill." Hate finished, his voice clearer since taking that pill. Naruto nodded before charging at the man, throwing one of his kodaches at him before jumping in the air and slashed him at a downward angle. Hate deflected the kodachi and sidestepped Naruto's attack and aimed a kick at the back of his head, only for Naruto to duck under it and attempt to sweep the Jinnin off of his feet. Hate backflipped to avoid the attempted sweep and continued to backflip away before landing on his feet, skidding slightly to a stop as he threw 3 kunai at a rapid pace towards the blonde, who created a cage bushin who he pulled in front of him to take the hit. The clone dispersed in a plum of smoke and Naruto saw his chance. Naruto made 3 cage bushins and hinged them into 3 kunes and ran from behind the dispersed clone smoke and threw them while he ran towards Hate, purposely missing his sensei, and began to slash repeatedly at him. Hate deflected the attacks before moving to the side fluidly and ducking another one of Naruto's slashes before sweeping his leg under Naruto's, making the boy fall on his back, but Naruto quickly rolled backwards and flipped himself onto his hands before vaulting himself in the air, making 3 hand seals before shouting "Cage Bushins no Jutsu." 30 cage bushins appeared in the air along Naruto and his clones pulled out their kodaches and when they landed on the ground, the army of blondes took off running at Hate, screaming as they came closer to him. Hate was mildly impressed. 30 shadow clones was no child's play to pull off, but the blonde did it and doesn't even look winded in this least. The leading clone jumped in the air and tried to attack Hate with its kodaches, but Hate moved to the side and quickly dispelled the clone with his katana. He then twirled his katana and deflected an intended strike of the bushin's kodachi and took off the bushin's head before grabbing a kunai from out his kunai pouch on his waist and used it to block a bushin's kodachi from cutting him and used his katana to deflect 2 more bushins from striking him. Hate quickly used his katana to cut off both of the bushin's heads before he forcefully pushed the bushin's kodaches out of its hands and into the air before stabbing the bushin in its throat with his kunai before quickly pulling it out and throwing it at a running bushin, hitting it in its head. Killing it instantly. Hate moved to the side to avoid and ducked an oncoming attack, only to find himself rolling to the side, nearly being impaled by a kodachi. Hate continued to roll until he rolled himself onto his knees and used his katana to block 4 kodaches. He quickly took out kunai and in one clean swipe, he cut them both in the stomach, dispelling them. He noticed 4 bushins running up behind him. He quickly stood up and ran towards them with his katana in his right hand and a kunai in his left. Hate jumped over one bushin who decided to tackle him and in one motion, he ducked and rolled under a bushin who also tried to tackle him and stabbed 2 bushin in the chest with his katana and his kunai. Hate pulled out the katana and the kunai and twirled his body around and decapitated the 2 bushins he had evaded a few moments earlier with his katana. Hate then took out an exploding tag and put it on his kunai and threw into one bushin who had 5 bushins around him. Before the bushins knew what to do, the tag exploded, killing the bushins in one fell swoop and also killing 5 more bushins when a tree that was blown in half from the exploding tag fell on them. Naruto watched in shock as he watched the Chunin decimated 22 of his bushins in less than 2 minutes with no problem at all, but Naruto suddenly remembered something and grinned. He knew how he was going to capture the scroll. He then ordered the rest of his bushins and told them the plan. The bushins nodded before jumping off the tree and onto the ground, only to stop. "So who's going first?" one of the bushins asked as the other 7 shrugged their shoulders in unison. "I know I'm not," the bushin near the tree said as it crossed his arms like a spoiled brat ignoring his mother because she wouldn't give him any ice cream after dinner. "Well, I saw how all my brothers died out there and I'm not going," the bushin crouching on his feet said with a lot of resentment towards Hate. The bushins suddenly started arguing between themselves about who was going to fight first. Naruto and Hate couldn't believe what was going on. What kind of bull was this? "Hey. You guys are supposed to be fighting Hate, not fighting each other. Naruto yelled only to receive the bird from his out clones. Hate sighed. He didn't know Naruto long, but he knew he was the only one who would argue with himself. Hate rolled his eyes with a smirk before he charged at the arguing blondes. Dead on guard. Naruto shouted before one of the clones was stabbed in the chest by the Jinin. He then turned his body and grabbed his katana, and in one fluid motion, he swings the katana out of the bushin and cuts two bushin straight through the middle. You bastard. The five exclaimed in unison as they began to use their katanas to slice him in two. Hate parried their blows and managed to kill two of them before his sword was knocked out of his hands and far behind him. Hate scowled and dodged the three bushin's blades while walking backwards, trying to get to his katana. The bushins and the original Naruto smiked. Hate couldn't fight with his blade. Hate kicked one of the bushins and used his chest as a springboard, but before he could reach his katana, the kunai Naruto had threw earlier bursted into smoke before a bushin ran out and jumped in the air before tackling the Jinin in midair, sending the two rolling to the ground. The two rolled on the ground until they skid to a stop. The bushin noticed the scroll on Hate's belt and reached for it, only to be dispelled by Hate's kunai in his back. Hate stood up shakily before seeing the bushins charging at him at a fast pace. Hate grabbed his katana and parried their blows again, but this time, Hate had more trouble doing so. The pill's effect is fading faster than I thought, Hate thought to himself calmly as he moved to the side to avoid a fatal hit. He knew at this point that he had to finish this and fast before he lost. Hate ducked under a slash and rolled behind the three clones and slashed upwards, cutting all three of the clones and dispelling them. Naruto looked at Hate and grinned when he heard a soft cough escape his throat. Kid, let's finish this now. He's getting weaker, Naruto heard Kasu say in his mind before nodding in agreement. Right, let's do this. Naruto shouted out, determination in his eyes before exclaiming, this is where I get serious, sensei. Kaigen. Sonic mode. Hate watched as lightly circled around the blonde before exploding outwards towards him, forcing him to jump into the tree to avoid the explosion, but once he looked down, but Naruto was gone. Before Hate could even say where did he go, Naruto had suddenly appeared before him and roundhouse kicked him hard in the face, sending the Jinin to the ground back first, causing him to skid lightly before coming to a stop. Hate looked up at the Genin in shock as a cocky grin was on Naruto's face. Don't look so shocked. The dual voice of Naruto exclaimed while pointing at his down sensei. You were the one who said come at me with the intent to kill. I'm just doing as you told, Naruto, Kasu said as he hopped from one foot to the other. He's almost as fast as Guy's student, with the weights on of course, but he's not as fast as me, Hei thought before he flipped to his feet and held his katana in front of his body. You caught me off guard, impressive. But it will not happen again, Hate said while biting back a cough, still trying to give the illusion that the pill is still in effect. Naruto grinned and took out his katanas before twirling them once in his hands. Oh, trust me, the dual voice spoke softly before Naruto looked at his sensei, his blue Kaigen glowing faintly, it will happen again. You can count on it. Hate merely smirked at the boy's words. This kid may be more challenging than I first expected. The wind blew over the area the two warriors stood in, their gazes locked in an internal battle of who will start this battle off first. Naruto smirked, jumped towards Hate and aimed a roundhouse kick at him. Hate was in shock before stepping back to avoid the kick, only to find himself gliding on the ground from a roundhouse punch Naruto had given him. Hate rolled himself back to his feet and ducked an oncoming strike from Naruto's blade, then moved to the side before he could be skewered by Naruto's other blade. Fast. Hate thought to himself as he continued to block Naruto's advancing shots before being able to hit Naruto with a rib-bruising kick, only to see Naruto bend his body sideways to avoid the kick. Seeing another chance, Hate shifted his position and kicked Naruto in his stomach, sending the genin flying back and rolling onto the ground. Naruto quickly got back on his feet and threw a kunai with a smirk on his face as he watched Hate deflected into the air. Gotcha Bushin Bakuha. The dual-voiced Uzumaki shouted before the kunai changed back into Naruto's Bushin and glowed brightly. Hate could only make a few seal before the clone exploded above him. Naruto smirked as the clone went off, knowing Hate couldn't have been able to dodge it in time, but his smirk soon changed into shock as he saw Hate in a nearly invisible orb. Gaze upon my personal jutsu, Naruto Tsuki Shirito. Naruto was simply stunned by this development. No fucking way. The dual-voiced Naruto said as he stepped back then ran towards Hate, both of his katanas in his hands. Hate smirked before he spun out of his orb and shouted Tsuki Shirito. Fumikiru. Moon shield. Take off. Hate then hit his katana on the shield and sent it flying towards Naruto, who met it head-on. Naruto moved to the side at the last second and dodged the orb, only for it to bounce off of a tree and hit Naruto hard in his back. What the Naruto didn't have a chance to finish his statement because at the precise moment, Hate shouted Tsuki Shirito Kureka Moon shield. Detonate. The orb suddenly exploded in a flash of light, blinding the Kenjutsu user and bathed the entire area in light. When the light faded away, Hayate found Naruto unconscious with smoke rising from off of his unconscious body. Hayate walked slowly towards the unconscious blonde, but when he got towards him, he looked on in shock as he watched Naruto began to rise shakily from the ground. A soft laughter escaped the blonde genin as he stared at the sky, confusing Hayate immensely. "Looks like you lost your scroll," Sensei Naruto's dual voice announced with an arrogant tone in his voice as Hayate looked at him with a confused look in his eyes, but then he looked down at his waist and still noticed his scroll was missing from his belt. Naruto grinned softly before he was dispelled, leaving a cloud of smoke behind. Hayate was shocked when he saw Naruto just disappear in a plum of smoke before chuckling to himself. "Impressive you were able to switch with a clone at the last second." "Interesting," Hayate said in a slight raspy tone. "Of course," Naruto replied with a smirk. "Now sensei, let the games truly begin," Naruto told him as he sheathed his two weapons before opening his right hand. Hayate looked on in wonder as lighting coursed around the boy's body to his open hand, creating an electric blue orb before the orb stretched out and took a form of a katana. The light then shot out like shards of light before looking in shock at the blade Naruto held in his hands. The blade was pitch black, while a blue lighting bolt was etched on the blade, and each second, a lighting bolt would streak across the blade before disappearing. Naruto suddenly fell on his knees, a feeling of fatigue flowing over his body, but then he stood up to Sana. "This is going to great, I can feel it in this blood of mine," before leaping at his sensei, lighting streaking at the edge of his katana. Naruto swung his blade at Hayate when he got close enough, but Hayate quickly blocked the katana with his own, nearly being pushed back. Hayate was able to push Naruto back, only to quickly go on the defensive as Naruto closed the distance and began relentlessly attacking him, and much to Hayate's shock, he had trouble blocking a few of them. His Kenjutsu has increased dramatically, his Denjutsu is very impressive. Hayate thought his move to the side to avoid a strike, but ducked to avoid a strike from behind him. He then twisted his body in an angle, allowing Naruto and his Bushin to fly under and over him before rolling on the ground and jumped back to his feet, blocking the two blondes. Hayate swept his feet under the two blondes' feet, effectively tripping them onto the ground, which Hayate tried to cut the two, but the original rolled out of the way to avoid it, while his clone was dispelled. Naruto flipped back on his feet only to bend backwards to avoid Hayate's katana cutting him in two. Hayate quickly spun around and axe-kicked Naruto in his chest, sending Naruto back onto the ground. Naruto quickly rolled to the side and continued rolling until he rolled himself back onto his feet and deflected two kunai with his katana, only to duck the swipe of Hayate's blade and counter, but slashing his blade up, but growled in annoyance when Hayate used a kunai to block it. Naruto and his sensei eyes caught each other's for a split moment before Naruto swept Hayate off of his feet and leapt up into the air and pointed his katana down towards Hayate, who quickly switched himself with a chuck of wood just as Naruto's blade pierced, then split it in half. Naruto's yanked his blade free and twirled it around in his hand while standing up. On sensei, no sense in prolonging your loss." Just then, Hayate's figure flickered in front of Naruto with his katana held high in the air, making Naruto raise his to defend with his sword, but then Hayate flickered out again, only to appear fully behind him, preparing to ream him through. Turning around as quickly as possible, Naruto blocked the strike with his sword and rammed his fist against Hayate's face, sending the Jonin stumbling backwards, where Naruto leapt up and slammed his blade against Hayate with a roar. A staring contest ensued between the two combatants, but Hayate forced him back into the air, where he pulled out several kunai and threw them towards Naruto, who used his weapon to deflect them all, but then he created 10 clones and ordered them to attack, making them yell out and dive down towards the Jonin at high speed. Seeing the clones come down at him, Hayate placed his katana at his side and dug his feet into the ground and narrowed his eyes. "Well then Naruto, you forced my hand." Hayate let a small smirk on his face as his katana began to glow a bright white while the area around him faded into a deep black simultaneously. "Mikazuki Yeba, Crescent Moon Blade." With those words, Hayate gripped his hilt tightly before swinging his blade in an arch, making a bright silvery white wave of chakra towards Naruto and his clones, who were not expecting it and was quickly dispelled. Seeing this attack coming, Naruto lifted his blade up and slashed it down against the wave of chakra to try and keep it from taking him out of the battle, but he found himself soaring high into the air before a small twinkle of light was seen in the bright blue sky. Hayate let a grin form on his face for a moment before turning around to black Naruto's blade. "I should have known you would get out of that one, Naruto." Naruto smirked at this and broke apart their clash while saying, "You keep underestimating sensei. That will lead to your defeat." Before the two began to trade blows with their weapons again, but their moves were slower due to their respective boosts fading. Hayate could feel the pill he had taken was nearly gone, and it was his will to keep him fighting at this pace, while Naruto was feeling the chakra fading from his body due to his katana. Taking a downward slash, Naruto stepped on Hei's foot as hard as he could to distract the Jonin long enough to ram his elbow into Hei's face, and when that proved successful, Naruto jumped back while saying it's time to end this with a bang. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. The Bushins appeared and charged towards Hei, who looked up and quickly made a few signs and said Tsuki Shairudo. Fumakir. Quickly making a large invisible sphere with his katana before spinning out of the shield and smacking it with his blade, sending it towards the Bushins. Naruto did another few seals before snapping his fingers and pointing towards the oncoming orb, making his clones run to it while shouting his jutsu, just as Hei shouted his as well. Bushin Bakuha. Tsuki Shairudo. Kareka. The explosion from the two attacks were so powerful, it sent the two combatants flying through the air and into the opposite sides of the area and slamming into the ground, effectively knocking Hei and Naruto out, causing his Kaigen to deactivate, as well as dispelling his katana. The entire area was quiet for a moment until Hei slowly stood up and took a few shaky steps back before lurching forward to cough violently. The sounds of his coughing soon stopped only for the eerily quiet air to be filled with his soft pant. When he looked up to see what had happened to his opponent, he shook his softly, seeing the boy's unconscious form. "You did well kid, but looks like I win," Hei said as he stared at Naruto. He was drained and he couldn't find the will to walk just yet. "Pity, I really wanted you as my student." Hei spoke with a bit of sadness in his voice as he looked towards the blonde's direction. What he said was true. He had seen the potential in the blonde-haired boy before and after the battle, and he knew that he didn't have much time left until his death towards this odd disease he had, so he needed to pass on all of his techniques to someone worthy, and when he first met the blonde genin, he believed he had found that person, and even now. He believes he has found that person, but the kid failed his test, there was no way he could renege on the agreement they had made, so he had no choice to fail him. Just then, he began to cough violently before leaning up off the ground and covering his mouth. After the coughing stopped, Hei removed his hand from his mouth and sighed deeply as he noticed the blood in his hands. "Great," Hei said as he wiped the blood on his flak jacket with a frown on his face. He knew full damn well he shouldn't have taken the pills due to its side effect of speeding up his disease, but he had to go make things more interesting during the test. With a heavy, raspy sigh, Hei walked sluggishly towards his alarm clock, which surprisingly was unharmed during the battle. He picked up the clock and grinned. Only 3 minutes left. It seems like he wouldn't have passed anyways, Hei spoke to himself as he was just about to turn off the clock when Iru climbed out of the bushes and stood up on its hind legs to touch Hei's left leg. Hei looked down and noticed Iru and sat down his clock before kneeling on the ground and petting the kit that was now on all 4 legs. Iru looked like he enjoyed the petting until it chomped down on Hei's hand, drawing blood from it. Hei quickly pulled his left hand back and scowled at the kit before he felt a soft tap on his right shoulder. Hei turned around and looked at the blonde who had a smile on his face. "Looks like I passed," Naruto said as Hei looked at him with a sense of sadness panging in his chest. "You must be delusional kid, I was bitten by this little fox which drew my blood, not you." Hei still had that small smile upon his face which confused him, but then a small yip was heard a few feet away, and that's when Hei saw a kid similar to the one in front of him prancing out of the bush. Hei then turned his head down to the fox before him and blinked in surprise when the kid said in Naruto's voice, "I win," before dispelling in a plume of smoke. Hei couldn't help but laugh in surprise at this, but then he started to cough violently. "So you had me fooled into a sense of victory before you made your strike. Very clever." The Jonin said with pride in his voice, which caused Naruto to blush at the praise. "Well, when I was younger, Aji-san and I used to play this game called chess, and it taught me how to strategize when in a tight bind. I knew I couldn't beat you by using my speed and strength alone, so I had to try and outthink you." Naruto stopped to take a breath before continuing. "Before you took that pill, I thought I had this in the bag. I thought it would be so simply to defeat you because all you had to do to lose was cough, and I would have been able to capitalize on that, but after you took that pill, I was quickly at a disadvantage and I had to change that. I thought tiring you out would do it, but that did not work, so I decided that in order to defeat you, I had to first let the pill's ability run its course, which I wasn't sure when that would happen, so I just winged it at every turn, but to be honest, I doubt I would have won if you hadn't used those awesome techniques." Naruto yawned and felt his eyes closing slowly after he finished talking while Hei just stared at him. Hei already knew about Naruto's unpredictability, but to use that during battle and just on the fly was simply amazing to the Jonin. At that moment, Hei could tell that this kid was going to be one amazing shinobi. He then chuckled before turning off his alarm and said, "Uzumaki Naruto, you have officially passed my test." Naruto would have jumped in the air and cheered really loudly, but he had fallen asleep after giving his explanation to his new sensei. Hei chuckled at the sleeping genin and picked him up off the ground and started to leave until little Iru had yipped, catching the attention of Hei and waking Naruto up slightly. "Sensei, can you carry Iru? I would, but I'm too tired," Naruto whispered before falling asleep again. Hayate nodded and picked the kid up off the ground and put it on the sleeping Naruto's chest. He knew full well that he shouldn't be helping Naruto pass Anko's test, but he decided that the kid deserved it for the intense battle they had been through. Hopefully Anko wouldn't find out and remove certain parts of his body. Last day of the test. Naruto opened his eyes and winced at the sunlight that hit his eyes. He forced himself to lean forward and rubbed his eyes for a few seconds and let his vision return before looking around the area. His eyes then widened as he found himself on one of the highest tree branches in the entire forest. He shakily stood up on his 2 feet and looked down at the ground, which was very far down, and wondered how he got up there in the first place until his mind did a quick rewind. The last thing he remembered was hearing Hayate saying he had passed his test and then blank spot, then waking up in Hayate's arms and telling the shinobi to get Iru, then a long blank spot, then now. He picked up his small furry companion and placed him inside of his torn jacket, getting a happy yip from the small kid, and looked around. What he didn't know, however, that there was a large, slim, gray snake slowly stalking its way towards him. Iru saw the snake and yipped very loudly, catching Naruto's attention. Naruto looked down at Iru in a confused manner, only to hear a voice inside of his head saying jump to the side, now. Naruto at first thought Kasu told him this, but he realized that Kasu's voice wasn't as dark or as evil sounding as this one, but Naruto complied and with a great leap, he landed on another branch and by mere seconds after he jumped. He managed to dodge the large snake that nearly ate him and little Iru. He landed on another tree branch and with great difficulty, he avoided plummeting to his death by mere inches. When he got himself steady, he looked back at the snake, who was now recoiling after hitting its head on the tree, and turned back around to see Anko on a higher branch, clapping slowly as if she was impressed. "Very good, Gaki, I'm impressed that you managed to dodge Kahana, Swift, but I doubt you'll be able to do it again," she said with a right eyebrow raised slightly in amusement, while Naruto and Iru growled at the snake summoner, but she went on talking, as if she didn't hear it. "You passed Hate's test. That takes some skill, but you passing his test doesn't mean shit to me, Gaki. What really matters is if you pass my test. Now I'm adding a little something to my test since you're so close to the exit. If you can escape the forest with the scroll and keep yourself from becoming Kahana's lunch, then you pass." Naruto grinned to himself, that sounded simple enough. Wait, did she say he had to have a scroll? He already had the scroll from Hade, so maybe that's what she meant, but then again, maybe he should check just in case. "You mean Hade's scroll from his test, right?" Naruto's jaw fell to the ground when Anko shook her head, a creepy smile etched on her face. "Sorry kid, but the scroll is on the snake's belly." The minute after Anko had said that, the large snake rose up from the ground and Naruto narrowed his eyes to Jeether and growled when he barely noticed the small scroll tied onto a long rope that stretched around the snake's body. He swiftly turned his head to her leaning figure and shouted, "You crazy bitch. I should have known you would have something up your sleeve." Naruto yelled with a pissed off look on his face, which she returned with a crazed smile. Behind that crazed smile, however, was a sea of anger, sadness and pity that was waiting to spill out of her, and as she stared at the blonde-haired boy, these emotions went haywire. She was angry at the fact she had lost her love the night before, and she was in rage after finding out that she would have to teach the very reason her love had died for. She wanted to hurt him, she wanted to kill him. She wanted to hurt him in every way. She just wanted him to feel the sorrow that was forever etched into her soul, but at the same time, she understood why Iruka had saved this boy at the cost of his life. Everything he had spoken to her about the small blonde was true. He was brash, straightforward, truthful, humble, mean and kind all at the same time. He also had a ton of potential in his body, and by beating Hade, he had certainly proved it. But there was something she could see even if Iruka hadn't told her about him. She could see the loneliness in his eyes. The very same loneliness that she has had since she was betrayed by Orochimaru and since she found out Iruka had died. Besides, if she killed the Gaki, the Hokage would have her killed, and then Iruka would kill her as well when she saw him again, and as much as she hated to admit it, she still had her promises to keep to her dead lover. She then realized that if somehow did pass her test, she could make him suffer for it, but also she knew he could become the shinobi her Iruka-kun knew he could be. And for that second before she disappeared in a flurry of leaves, she hoped that he did pass her test.